Level 1. The liar paradox. This sentence is false, simple, self-contained, impossible. Imagine reading a sentence, just one. No math, no science, no riddles. It simply says, this sentence is false. That's it. But now, you try to understand it. If the sentence is true, then it must be false, because that's what it says. But if it's false, then it's not false. It's telling the truth. So, it must be true. But that would make it false. And just like that, your logic collapses into a quiet, infinite loop. No explosions, no equations. Just a few plain words that gently pull the floor out from beneath reason. This is the liar paradox, one of the oldest and simplest paradoxes known. It dates back over 2,000 years, to a time when philosophy and language were still learning how to hold hands without tripping over each other. The ancient Greek philosopher Eubulides first posed it. And today, it still sits at the heart of logic, computer science, and the philosophy of language. Because the liar paradox doesn't just confuse, it breaks things. In logic systems, statements are supposed to be either true or false. That's the whole structure. But the liar paradox doesn't fit. It slips between those two pillars and waits, showing us how fragile certainty really is. If we try to assign it a value, we end up in contradiction. If we refuse to assign it one, we break the system's completeness. It's like a quiet virus for the mind. It doesn't crash the machine. It just loops forever. Now imagine this isn't just a sentence. Imagine it's a thought, a belief, a conviction. And now imagine how easily that same loop can live inside a person. An idea that invalidates itself, but still feels true. Sometimes the most dangerous truths are the ones we can't even decide are real. They just circle, slowly, in the dark. Level 2. The barber paradox. Who shaves the barber if he only shaves those who don't shave themselves? Picture a town, small, tidy, logical. In this town, there's a single barber. He has one rule. He shaves all and only those who do not shave themselves. Simple, right? If you shave yourself, the barber leaves you alone. If you don't shave yourself, he steps in and does it for you. But then a question is asked. Who shaves the barber? And suddenly, the rule turns in on itself. If the barber shaves himself, then he shouldn't, because he only shaves those who don't shave themselves. But if he doesn't shave himself, then he should, because he only shaves those who don't shave themselves. Either way, the rule breaks. Logic folds. The barber becomes a contradiction. He cannot exist, at least not under his own rule. This is the barber paradox, and at first it feels like a puzzle, like there must be some clever workaround, a hidden detail we've missed. But there isn't. The paradox isn't a riddle with an answer. It's a spotlight, exposing the flaw in trying to apply a rule to everything, including the one who enforces it. This idea isn't just theoretical. It lives inside systems that turn inward, in logic, in set theory, in language. The barber paradox is a simpler cousin of a much deeper problem, Russell's paradox. A contradiction discovered when asking whether the set of all sets that don't contain themselves contains itself. It sounds abstract, but it isn't, because rules, beliefs, and even thoughts sometimes turn around and swallow themselves. And when they do, we're left like the barber, trying to obey something that makes obedience impossible. Sometimes the loop isn't out there. It's inside the rule we trust. And it waits patiently, with a razor in its hand. Level 3. Catch 22. You can't win, because trying to win means you've already lost. You're a soldier. You want to stop flying missions. You've seen too much. You're terrified. There's a rule. If you're crazy, you don't have to fly. All you have to do is ask. But if you ask not to fly, that proves you're sane, because only a sane person would want to avoid dying. And sane people have to fly. So you're stuck. If you fly, you're crazy. If you ask not to, you're sane, and must keep flying. Either way, the rule has you. This is Catch-22, a paradox not born in mathematics or philosophy, but in war, bureaucracy, and the quiet ways people are trapped by rules that fold in on themselves. The phrase comes from Joseph Heller's novel, Catch-22, a dark satire of war and madness. But the logic of the paradox lives everywhere. It appears whenever escaping a system requires the very thing the system won't allow. You need experience to get a job, but you need a job to get experience. You need credit to take out a loan, but you need a loan to build credit. You need to be free to challenge a system, but challenging it can cost you your freedom. That's Catch-22, a door that locks itself from both sides. It's not about contradiction. It's about self-preservation built into the rule itself. The system is designed not to protect you, but to protect itself. And it does that by making your desire to escape the very reason you're trapped. That's why Catch-22 feels so familiar. It's not just fiction, it's something we've all brushed against. A moment when logic turns cold. When asking for help makes you guilty. When playing the game right ensures you lose. And somewhere, behind the desk, the rule just sits there. Smiling. Level 4. The Ship of Theseus. If every part of something is replaced, is it still the same thing? A ship sits in the harbor. It's old but beloved, a vessel of legends. One by one, its wooden planks begin to rot. So they're replaced. First the deck, then the masts, then the hull. Years pass. Not a single original piece remains. And now you ask, is this still the ship of Theseus? It looks the same. It carries the same name. It remembers the same voyages. But not a single part is what it once was. Now imagine this. Every plank that was removed, someone kept them. Carefully, lovingly. And over time, they used those discarded parts to rebuild the ship, elsewhere. Now there are two. One made of new parts, one made of the old. Which one is the real ship of Theseus? This is the ship of Theseus paradox, a question that drifts between identity, memory, and change. It asks, what makes something itself? Is it the parts, the history, the function? Or is it something intangible? A continuity that survives transformation. This isn't just about ships, it's about you. Every 7 years, most of the cells in your body are replaced. Your memories change. Your beliefs shift. You are, in some ways, not who you were. So, are you still you? Or are you a new person with an old name? Philosophers still argue. Some say identity is in the structure, the way parts relate. Others say it's in the history, the continuity over time. And some say the question itself is flawed, that identity isn't a thing, but a story. And stories can be rewritten. So, next time you stand in front of a mirror and feel like you've changed, ask yourself, how many parts must be replaced before something becomes someone else? Level 5. The Sorite's Paradox. The Heap. If one grain doesn't make a difference, when does it start to matter? Imagine a single grain of sand. No one would call that a heap. Now add another grain. Still not a heap. Add a third, a fourth, a fifth. At what point does it become something else? When does it stop being just a few grains and start being a heap? Is there a clear moment, a tipping point, or does it just happen, without anyone noticing? This is the Sorites paradox, from the Greek word sorites, meaning heap. It reveals something subtle and unsettling about how we define things. It shows us that when change happens slowly, incrementally, we lose track of the shift. And it applies to more than just sand. If you pluck one hair from your head, you're not bald. Pluck another, still not bald. At what exact hair do you become someone else? If you stay up 5 minutes later each night, when do you become someone who doesn't sleep? If you compromise a little, just once, when do you stop being the person you were? The paradox exposes the problem of vague concepts. Words like heap, tall, old, or rich don't have sharp edges. They blur. They bleed into each other. And yet we rely on them. We build identities on them. We make laws with them, all based on lines we can't quite draw. The Sorites paradox doesn't have an easy answer. Some say we need precise thresholds, arbitrary cutoffs. Others say vagueness is just part of reality, that some things aren't meant to be pinned down. But either way, the effect is real. Gradual change can hide enormous transformation. And one day, you might look around and realize, grain by grain, everything is different. And you never even saw it happen. Level 6. The paradox of hedonism. The more you chase happiness, the further it slips away. You want to be happy, that's simple. Maybe even the most human thing there is. So you do what makes you feel good. You chase comfort, pleasure, excitement, freedom, and for a moment, it works. But something strange happens. The more directly you pursue happiness, the more it recedes, like a shadow under your feet. The closer you look, the more it vanishes. This is the paradox of hedonism. It says, happiness cannot be pursued directly. The more you try to grasp it, the more elusive it becomes. Because happiness is often a byproduct, a side effect of doing something else, something meaningful, something challenging, something outside yourself. You might laugh while helping someone else. Feel joy while getting lost in a project. Find peace when you stop thinking about whether you feel peaceful. But when you fixate on joy itself, you begin to measure it, analyze it, doubt it, and that very act starts to erode it. Philosophers like John Stuart Mill noticed this over a century ago. He said, ask yourself whether you are happy and you cease to be so. The moment you turn inward, you lose the moment. Because joy doesn't like to be hunted. It's not prey, it's light. You don't chase the sunrise, you walk east and let it come to you. The paradox is not that happiness is impossible. It's that happiness works like sleep. You can't force it. You can only make space for it to arrive. And often it arrives when you least expect it. So, if you're searching for happiness, maybe stop searching. Start living. Start doing. Start losing yourself in something larger. Because sometimes joy comes quietly, when you're too busy to notice you've already found it. Level 7. The paradox of choice. The more options we have, the harder it is to choose. Imagine walking into a store. You want to buy something simple, a bottle of water, but there are rows of them. Dozens. Sparkling, spring, alkaline, electrolyte-infused, flavored, filtered, imported. You freeze. Instead of feeling free, you feel overwhelmed. You hesitate. You overthink. And when you finally make a choice, you walk away wondering if it was the wrong one. This is the paradox of choice. It says, more options don't always bring more satisfaction. Sometimes they bring regret. Or worse, paralysis. In theory, freedom should feel good. Having more choices should mean more control, more happiness. But in practice, each additional option means one more thing to compare, one more fear of missing out, one more possibility to mourn. You start imagining the options you didn't choose, and wonder if one of them would have been better. Even if you picked something great, you can still feel like you lost. Psychologist Barry Schwartz explored this in depth. He found that people with more choices often experience less joy, less confidence, and more doubt after deciding. And in a world overflowing with options for food, careers, relationships, identities, the weight of choosing can quietly wear us down. There's nothing wrong with wanting choice, but sometimes the freedom to choose becomes a burden to carry. And the real question isn't, what's the best option? It's, what choice lets me stop searching? Because peace doesn't come from having everything. It comes from not needing everything. From picking and then letting go. Level 8. The Abilene Paradox. Everyone agrees to do something that no one actually wants. It's a hot afternoon in Texas. A family sits around a porch table. Someone suggests driving to Abilene, hours away, for dinner. No one really wants to go, but no one says so. They all nod politely. They pile into the car. The trip is long, the food is bad, the heat is worse. And on the way home, someone finally says, "I never wanted to go." One by one, the others admit the same. They all went to avoid disappointing each other. They went to Abilene, together, alone. This is the Abilene Paradox, a quietly haunting insight into how group dynamics can betray individual truth. It's not about disagreement. It's about agreement that no one believes in. Each person assumes that everyone else wants something, so they suppress their own discomfort in the name of keeping peace. But no one wants it, and no one says so. It happens in families, in boardrooms, in politics, in war. A team launches a doomed project. A group chooses the wrong strategy. A nation starts a fight no one believes in. And all along, each person is thinking, "I didn't want this, but I thought everyone else did." The danger isn't disagreement. It's silence. The quiet fear of rocking the boat, of being the one voice that says no when everyone else nods. But sometimes that no is the one honest sound in the room. The Abilene Paradox teaches something subtle. If you don't speak your truth, you might end up on a road no one meant to take, with people who feel just as trapped, just as polite, just as lost. And the only thing harder than the trip is admitting you never wanted to go. Level 9. The Hedgehog's Dilemma. The closer we get to others, the more we risk being hurt. Picture two hedgehogs. It's cold. They want warmth, comfort, closeness. So they move toward each other. But as they draw near, their sharp spines begin to sting. The very act of getting close causes pain. So they back away, alone, cold. Eventually, they try again, carefully, just close enough to feel less alone, but not so close that it hurts. This is the hedgehog's dilemma. And it's not really about hedgehogs. It's about people. It's about you, about the deep need to connect, and the fear that connection brings. Because intimacy is sharp. To let someone in, you have to show your softest parts, your insecurities, your flaws, your truth. And in doing so, you risk pain. The paradox is simple. We crave closeness, but closeness can cut us. So we protect ourselves, with distance, distraction, pride. But in that safety, we lose the very thing we wanted: warmth, understanding, love. The hedgehog's dilemma was explored by Arthur Schopenhauer and later by Sigmund Freud. It's not just philosophy, it's psychology. It's what happens when past wounds make us cautious, when every touch feels like a risk, and when self-protection becomes a kind of prison. There's no clean solution, just a delicate balance between openness and armor, between need and fear. The goal is not to eliminate the spines, but to learn how to approach gently, to accept that connection comes with risk, but that loneliness is its own kind of pain. And in that space between the two, we find something soft, something human, something worth the effort. Level 10. Moravec's Paradox. What's easy for us is hard for machines, and what's hard for us is easy for them. You ask a robot to solve a math problem. It does it instantly. You ask it to walk across the room, grasp a mug, and smile at the right moment in a conversation. It stumbles. Literally. This is Moravec's paradox. The strange observation that tasks we humans find effortless are often the hardest for machines to replicate. And the things that baffle us, like calculus, statistics, or memorizing a billion facts, are simple for machines. Why? Because what's easy for us isn't actually easy at all. Catching a ball, recognizing a face, understanding a joke, walking on uneven ground. These are things our minds and bodies have been evolving to do for millions of years. They feel natural only because they're buried deep in layers of muscle memory, intuition, and subconscious processing. But a machine? It doesn't have those instincts. It doesn't see the way we do. It has to build perception from raw pixels and numbers. So, a child can identify a cat, while the world's best AI still makes mistakes. But give that same child a logic puzzle, or ask them to solve differential equations, and they'll struggle. Meanwhile, the AI breezes through it. Hans Moravec, a pioneer in robotics, first wrote about this paradox in the 1980s. He noticed that researchers had made huge strides in symbolic reasoning, but basic sensoromotor skills remained out of reach. It was like building a brilliant mind in a body that couldn't balance. Moravec's paradox reminds us that intelligence isn't just about IQ, it's about subtlety, context, movement, emotion, things we take for granted until we try to teach them to something else. And suddenly we realize just how much of what we do can't be explained, only lived. Level 11. The Paradox of Fiction. Why do we cry over people who never existed? You're watching a film. The character is fictional. You know that. They were written, cast, performed, but when they suffer, you feel it. Your stomach turns. Your eyes burn. Maybe you cry. Why? You know it's not real. No one died. Nothing happened. And yet, something in you reacts as if it did. This is the paradox of fiction. It asks, how can we feel genuine emotion for things we don't believe are real? According to traditional logic, emotion requires belief. You're afraid of the dog because you believe it might bite. You grieve for someone because you believe they're gone. So, if we don't believe the story is real, why does it hurt? Philosophers have wrestled with this. Some say it's about imagination, that imagining something vividly enough can trigger real emotion. Others argue we suspend disbelief, briefly treating fiction like truth to enter the story fully. And some suggest we're not as logical as we think, that our emotional systems respond automatically, even when reason says, this isn't real. But there's something deeper here. Maybe fiction taps into something truer than facts. Maybe these invented stories reach past logic, into empathy, into memory, into the part of us that needs to care about something to feel alive. The paradox isn't just that we cry during movies, It's that the tears are real. And in those moments, when the lights are low and the music swells and a story unfolds that touches something inside you, you remember that emotion isn't bound by truth. It's bound by meaning. Level 12. The Monty Hall Problem. When switching feels wrong, but is mathematically right. You're on a game show. There are 3 doors. Behind one, a car. Behind the others, goats. You choose door number 1. The host, who knows what's behind all the doors, opens door number 3, revealing a goat. Then he asks, "Do you want to switch to door number 2? What do you do? It feels like it doesn't matter. 1 car, 2 doors, 50-50 chance. Right? Wrong. This is the Monty Hall Problem, a probability paradox named after the host of Let's Make a Deal. And it reveals something unnerving. Your intuition can lie to you. Here's what's really happening. When you first picked door number 1, you had a 1 in 3 chance of being right. That means you had a 2 in 3 chance of being wrong. When the host opens a goat door, he's not doing it randomly. He's giving you information. And the odds don't reset. They shift. Now, door number 1 still has a 1 in 3 chance, but door number 2, the remaining unopened one, absorbs the full 2 in 3 odds. Switching doubles your chance of winning, but it doesn't feel that way. It feels like gambling, like betraying your first choice, like uncertainty, dressed up as logic, because human intuition struggles with probability. We assume fairness, balance, symmetry. But probability isn't fair. It's cold, precise, counterintuitive. The Monty Hall Problem has been proven, tested, demonstrated again and again. Still, people resist it. They dig in. And that's the paradox. Even when reason is clear, emotion whispers, "Don't switch." And in that quiet tension between math and gut feeling, we see just how fragile our sense of certainty really is. Level 13. The Birthday Paradox. How can 23 people be enough for 2 to share a birthday? You walk into a room with 22 strangers. You chat. You laugh. You don't ask birthdays. But if someone did, there's a 50% chance that 2 of you share the same one. Not twins. Not planned. Just coincidence. Only 23 people. And already the odds of a match are even. By 30 people, it jumps to 70%. By 50, it's 97%. Intuition says that's impossible. But the math disagrees. This is the birthday paradox. A puzzle that feels wrong because our brains don't think like statisticians. We tend to think person to date. What are the chances someone has my birthday? That's 1 in 365. Feels rare. But the real question is any pair matching any other. And there are many pairs. In a room of 23 people, there are 253 possible pairs. Each one has a shot at matching, and as those pairs multiply, the odds climb faster than we expect. It's not a trick. It's not a gimmick. It's a reminder. Our intuition breaks down when faced with large combinations. Probability feels like common sense, until it doesn't. And that's what makes it unsettling. Because if something as basic as birthdays can surprise us, what else are we misjudging? What other patterns are hiding just out of reach? The birthday paradox is harmless, even fun. But underneath the surprise is something deeper. The world is more connected than we realize. And sometimes, it takes only a small group for coincidence to become inevitable. Level 14. The Boy or Girl Paradox. How does the way you ask a question change the answer entirely? You hear this scenario. A family has 2 children. You're told that one of them is a boy. What are the odds that the other child is a girl? Your gut might say, well, if one's a boy, then the other must be either a boy or a girl, 50-50. But the actual answer is not 50%. It's 2/3. And the reason why reveals just how fragile logic becomes when filtered through language. This is the boy or girl paradox. It's not about children, it's about probability, information, and perspective. Let's break it down. There are 4 possible combinations for 2 children. Boy, 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 girl, girl, boy, girl, girl. If you're told one of them is a boy, you can eliminate Satur 4. That leaves boy, 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 girl, girl, boy. Each combination is equally likely, and in 2 of those 3, the other child is a girl. So the chance isn't 50%, it's 2 out of 3. But change how the question is asked, and the answer shifts. If you're told that the older child is a boy, then it really is 50-50. Because now you've fixed one variable. The uncertainty only applies to the younger child. This paradox shows something subtle but powerful. The way information is framed alters the logic behind it. Same family, same facts, different lens, different conclusion. We like to think of logic as clear, clean, universal. But when language enters the room, so does ambiguity. And sometimes the truth depends more on how you ask than what you know. Level 15. The 2-envelope paradox. One envelope has more, but switching always feels smarter, even when it isn't. You're handed 2 envelopes. Each contains money. One has twice as much as the other. You choose one. You peek inside, $100. Now you wonder, should you switch? If the envelope you chose is the smaller, then the other must have $200. If it's the larger, then the other has $50. So, on average, 50% times $50 plus 50% times $200. $200 equals $125. That's more than $100. So, you should switch, right? But wait. Now you have the second envelope, and the same logic applies. Again, it seems smarter to switch back, and again, and again. This is the 2-envelope paradox, a loop that never ends, where logic keeps nudging you to switch, no matter which envelope you hold. It feels like switching is always better, which can't be true, because you can't switch forever. Eventually, you have to stop. So, what's going wrong? The paradox lives in the assumptions. When we say there's a 50-50 chance of having the smaller amount, we forget that the other amount isn't symmetrical. There's no true upper or lower limit defined, no grounding. And so the expectation becomes distorted, pulled by the infinite possibilities of larger and smaller numbers. In short, we're trying to make a decision based on incomplete information. And logic, when stretched too far, becomes slippery. The paradox doesn't show that you should switch endlessly. It shows that reasoning can loop when fed the wrong inputs. And sometimes, even when we do all the math, we still don't know what to do. Maybe the wisest choice is simply to choose and hold. Not because it's optimal, but because sometimes the search for certainty never ends. And we all have to stop somewhere. Level 16. Simpson's Paradox. Sometimes the truth in the parts disappears in the whole. You look at 2 medical treatments. Treatment A works better for men. Treatment B works better for women. But when you combine the data, treatment A looks worse for everyone. How is that possible? How can something be true in every subgroup, but false when those groups are combined? That's the strange, quiet twist of Simpson's paradox. a case where averages lie, and the truth changes when you zoom out. It's not just math, it's misunderstanding. Because what's really happening is that the groups are weighted differently. Maybe more women took treatment A, but they were sicker to begin with. Or more men took treatment B, but only in mild cases. So, when you combine the numbers, the hidden imbalance distorts the overall picture. This paradox appears in medicine, in law, in social science, in sports. Anywhere we compare groups to totals, it shows how easy it is to misread patterns, to trust statistics that seem clean but are quietly broken. Simpson's paradox doesn't break logic. It reveals how logic needs context. Because sometimes truth lives in the details, and when you zoom out too far, you lose it. It's a warning, really, that numbers aren't neutral, that data can mislead, and that the more confident a statistic looks, the more carefully you should ask, what am I not seeing? Because sometimes the closer you look, the truer it gets. Level 17. The Friendship Paradox. On average, your friends have more friends than you do. It starts with a strange feeling. Everyone seems more connected than you. They go to more parties. They get more replies. They seem to matter more. Maybe it's just insecurity. Maybe it's just social media. But here's the twist. Statistically, you're right. On average, your friends do have more friends than you. Not because you're unpopular, but because math is weird. This is the friendship paradox. And it goes like this. People with more friends are more likely to show up in other people's friend lists. They're more visible, more frequently connected, and more likely to be counted. So, when you look at your circle, it's naturally skewed toward people who are more social. You're comparing yourself to an unfair sample, and that sample makes you feel small. Imagine a campus. Most students have 3 to 4 friends, but a few have 100. Those popular students will show up again and again in everyone's network. So even if most people are average, they're surrounded by people who don't seem average at all. The paradox doesn't stop at friendships. It applies to influence, wealth, followers, attention. The more someone has, the more likely they are to be seen, and the more we see them, the more we assume they're the norm. But they're not. They're the exception, just multiplied. The friendship paradox is a mirror that stretches what we see and shrinks how we feel. So next time you scroll, and everyone looks more connected, remember, that's not your failure. It's math. And math, like appearances, can be deceiving. Level 18. The Potato Paradox. A 1% change makes half the potatoes disappear. You have 100 kilograms of potatoes. They're 99% water by weight. Only 1% is solid. Now, imagine they dry out, just a little. Now, they're 98% water instead of 99%. How much do they weigh? Your brain says, maybe a little less. 98 kilogram. 97. Number, they now weigh 50 kilograms. Half. This is the potato paradox, a simple math problem that feels impossible. How can just a 1% change in water cut the weight in half? But the math is sound. The misunderstanding lives in how we see percentages. At 99% water, 1% of 100 kilograms is solid. That's 1 kilogram. That means there's 99 kilograms of water and 1 kilogram of solid mass. Now, let's say the potatoes dry until they're 98% water. That 1 kilogram of solid stuff stays the same, but now it's only 2% of the total weight. So 1 kilogram equals 2%, which means the total must be 50 kilograms. And just like that, half of your potatoes are gone. It's not a trick. It's just non-intuitive. Because we're used to thinking of percentages as small changes, but when they shift in relative terms, when the base they're comparing to moves, the effects can be massive. The potato paradox is funny. It feels like a joke, but it teaches something serious. That even simple numbers can be misleading. That percentages, like people, sometimes hide more than they show, and that small changes can quietly reshape the whole. So, the next time something feels just 1% off, look again. Because sometimes 1% is everything. Level 19. Bertrand's Paradox. What's the chance of something random? If random has no single meaning, you're asked a simple question. Pick a random chord inside a circle. What's the probability that it's longer than the side of an equilateral triangle inscribed in that circle? Sounds like a math problem, a precise answer waiting to be found. But here's the catch. How do you define random? Because depending on how you pick that chord, you'll get different answers. Not just different methods, different results. This is Bertrand's paradox, and it shakes the foundation of probability. Because the answer isn't ambiguous, it's contradictory. You can get 1/4, or 1/3, or 1/2. All valid, all logically sound, all incompatible. Why? Because in continuous spaces, like a circle, random can mean many things. Do you pick 2 points on the edge and connect them? Do you fix one point and spin the other? Do you pick a point and a random radius? Each method feels reasonable. Each defines a random chord. But each skews the distribution in a subtle, hidden way. So your outcome depends entirely on how you ask the question. That's what makes Bertrand's paradox so unsettling. It's not just about geometry, it's about definitions, about how math, a language we trust to be clean and absolute, can split under pressure. In real life, randomness matters. In simulations, in cryptography, in physics. But Bertrand's paradox reminds us that randomness isn't pure. It's shaped by context. And sometimes to get a real answer, you have to ask a better question. Because probability is never just about numbers. It's about what you mean when you say anything can happen. Level 20. The Allais Paradox. When rational choices don't feel rational at all, you're given a choice. Option A, a guaranteed $1 million. Option B, an 89% chance to win $1 million, a 10% chance to win $5 million, and a 1% chance to win nothing. Most people choose A. It feels safer, certain. Now, a second choice. Option C, an 11% chance to win $1 million. Option D, a 10% chance to win $5 million. Now, most people choose D. But here's the twist. If your brain followed pure expected value, your answers should be consistent. But they aren't. And that inconsistency is the paradox. This is the Allais paradox, discovered by economist Maurice Allais in 1953. It reveals something powerful and unsettling about how we make decisions. Namely, we don't really choose based on logic. In the first scenario, people prefer certainty, even if the gamble could be better. But in the second, with no guaranteed win, they're more willing to take a risk. The numbers haven't changed much, but the framing has, and our instincts shift with it. This breaks a key rule in classical economics, the independence axiom, which says our preferences should be stable regardless of context. But humans aren't economic models. We're emotional, risk-averse, contradictory. And the Allais paradox shows that certainty has more weight in our minds than raw outcomes. It's not irrational, it's human, because we fear loss more than we value gain. We overestimate what we can touch, and we chase guarantees in a world full of chance. So when logic says one thing and your gut says another, maybe the paradox isn't the choice. Maybe it's that two truths can live in the same mind at the same time, and both can feel right. Level 21. The St. Petersburg Paradox. A game with infinite expected value that no one wants to pay much for. You're invited to play a game. A coin is flipped. If it lands heads on the first flip, you win $2. Heads on the second flip, $4, then $8, then $16, and so on. Each time you get heads, the prize doubles. The game ends when the coin lands tails. So, how much would you pay to play? Most people say, maybe $10, $20. But here's the twist. The expected value of this game is infinite. This is the St. Petersburg Paradox. Because mathematically, this game should be worth more than any amount you can name. Each possible outcome, $2, $4, $8, $16, multiplied by its probability, adds to a sum that never ends. Yet almost no one would pay even $50 to play. Why? Because while the math is infinite, your intuition isn't. The paradox comes from a gap between two worlds: mathematics, which deals in absolutes, and human decision-making, which deals in fear, value, and diminishing returns. Sure, there's a tiny chance of winning $1 million, but it feels less real than the certainty of losing $100. The bigger the stakes, the more cautious we get. Economists explain this using utility theory. That $1 million doesn't feel a million times better than $1. It's not the amount that matters. It's the value you assign to it. And the value tapers off. So the St. Petersburg Paradox isn't just about coins. It's about how we think. That logic without context misses the human factor, and that infinite gain doesn't always outweigh finite risk. Sometimes, the mind prefers a small win to the illusion of endless reward. Because what we want isn't just possibility. It's peace. Level 22. The Raven Paradox. Hempel's Paradox. Can a green apple prove that all ravens are black? You're a scientist. You make a statement. All ravens are black. Simple. Testable. Every time you see a black raven, your confidence grows. But here's the twist. Logically, your statement is equivalent to, all non-black things are not ravens. So, if you see a green apple, a non-black thing that's not a raven, you've technically found evidence that all ravens are black. That's the paradox. This is the Raven Paradox, also called Hempel's Paradox, named after the philosopher Carl Hempel, who posed it in the 1940s. It shows how the rules of logic can clash with common sense. We intuitively believe that to prove a claim about ravens, we should look at ravens. But logic doesn't care. It cares about structure. All ravens are black is logically equivalent to everything that is not black is not a raven. And so, a white shoe, a blue car, a yellow flower, all become data points supporting your raven theory. The problem is not with the logic, it's with our understanding of confirmation. In practice, not all observations carry the same weight. Seeing 100 black ravens matters. Seeing 1,000 green apples, not so much. But logic, in its pure form, doesn't weigh evidence. It just counts it. The Raven Paradox reminds us that truth is shaped by more than just form. It's shaped by context, relevance, and the murky art of deciding what actually counts. Because sometimes you can follow all the rules of reasoning, and still feel like you've proved nothing at all. Level 23. The unexpected hanging paradox. A sentence so logical, it breaks reality. A judge tells a prisoner, "You will be hanged at noon on one weekday next week, but it will be a surprise. You won't know the day until the moment it happens." The prisoner thinks it through. If the hanging hasn't happened by Thursday, it must be on Friday. But then I'd expect it, so it can't be Friday. So it can't be Thursday either, because if Friday's ruled out, then Thursday becomes the last possible day, and I'd expect that too. One by one, he eliminates every day. The conclusion? It can't happen. But then, on Wednesday, he's hanged, and he's completely surprised. This is the unexpected hanging paradox, a mind-bending tangle of logic, expectation, and belief. At its core, it's about self-reference. The statement refers to the listener's reaction to the statement. The logic used to predict the outcome undoes the outcome. By trying to reason it out, the prisoner becomes vulnerable to exactly what he was trying to prevent. Surprise. It's not just a trick, it's a genuine philosophical problem. Because the judge's statement is logically consistent until you try to act on it. And then logic starts eating itself. Versions of this paradox show up in time travel, in artificial intelligence, even in law. They live in the space between knowledge and belief, between what is said and what is assumed. The unexpected hanging reminds us that sometimes knowing too much makes you blind. That prediction can alter the future it tries to foresee, and that some outcomes are only possible because we think they're not. Level 24. The drinker paradox. In every bar, there's someone who's drinking implies everyone's drinking. You walk into a bar. It's busy, laughter, clinking glasses, music. Some people are drinking, some aren't. Then someone says, "There is a person in this bar such that if they are drinking, then everyone is drinking." It sounds ridiculous. How could one person's actions define the whole group? But the math says they're right. Always. This is the drinker paradox, a result from formal logic. It sounds absurd. It feels like a joke. But it's provably true, in any non-empty group. Here's how it works. There are only two possibilities. If everyone in the bar is drinking, then the statement is trivially true, no matter who you pick. But what if not everyone is drinking? Then there must be at least one person who isn't. Let's say you point to them. Now, if this person is drinking, then everyone is. Well, they're not drinking, so the condition is false. And in logic, a statement that starts with a false premise is considered true, no matter what follows. It's called a vacuous truth, so the statement is still valid. The drinker paradox shows that logic doesn't always match intuition, because in logic, truth isn't about meaning, it's about structure. And sometimes, what feels like nonsense is airtight reasoning. It's unsettling, because we like our truths to feel real. But this paradox reminds us that what's true might live entirely in form, not in the world we see. So, next time you walk into a room and someone says something that sounds impossibly broad, they might just be technically right. Level 25. The crocodile paradox. When the answer makes itself wrong, a crocodile snatches a child. The parent begs for the child's return. The crocodile makes a deal. If you guess correctly what I'll do next, I'll return the child. If you're wrong, I keep them. The parent replies, "You will not return my child." And suddenly, the crocodile is trapped, because no matter what he does, he breaks the rule. This is the crocodile paradox, an ancient logic problem about self-reference, prediction, and the loop that forms when a guess becomes part of the outcome. Let's break it down. If the crocodile does return the child, then the parent's guess, "You will not return my child," was wrong. So, by the crocodile's rule, he should not return the child. But if he doesn't return the child, then the parent's guess was correct, and he's supposed to give the child back. Either way, he breaks the condition. There's no outcome that satisfies the rules. Like the liar paradox, this one loops inward. It forces a contradiction not in the outcome, but in the very logic meant to decide the outcome. It's not just a fable. It echoes in philosophy, law, and computer science, in contracts that refer to themselves, in programs that check their own behavior, in predictions that influence the future they try to foresee. The problem isn't the crocodile, it's the structure, a system that folds in on itself and collapses. The crocodile paradox shows how language, when used to define itself, can break the very meaning it tries to create. Because sometimes, trying to guess the future is what makes it unguessable. Level 26. The Paradox of the Court. A teacher sues his student, and the verdict destroys both their arguments. An ambitious law student approaches a famous teacher. He wants to study, but he can't pay up front. So they agree. The student will pay after he wins his first court case. Time passes. The student finishes his training, but never takes a case. The teacher waits. Still, no payment. Frustrated, the teacher sues him to get the money. And that's when things fall apart. This is the paradox of the court, also known as the Protagoras paradox, after the ancient Greek philosopher who lived it. In court, the student presents a clever defense. If I lose this case, I don't have to pay, because the deal said payment comes after I win a case. But if I win, then I still don't have to pay, because I haven't lost. He argues. Either way, he owes nothing. But the teacher flips the logic. If I win this case, he pays by court order. If I lose, then he's won his first case, and owes me by contract. Either way, he should pay. Both arguments sound airtight. Both lead to opposite outcomes, and both seem inescapably valid. So, who's right? That's the paradox. Because the system of logic, designed to resolve disputes, creates a loop that can't be untangled. Each side's truth undoes the other's. There is no resolution without contradiction. The paradox of the court is more than a historical curiosity. It reveals the limits of rules when they begin to reference themselves, when truth becomes entangled with procedure, when the game's outcome breaks the rules that define it. In court, in contracts, in debates and dilemmas, this loop still lurks. A reminder that not every clever argument has a clean conclusion. And sometimes, winning the case means breaking the very terms you were trying to uphold. Level 27. The Prisoner's Dilemma. When doing what's best for yourself makes everyone worse off. Two prisoners sit in separate cells. They're accused of a crime they committed together. The police have enough evidence to convict them, but not for everything. Each prisoner is offered a deal. If you betray your partner and they stay silent, you go free, and they get a harsh sentence. If you both stay silent, you both get a light sentence. If you both betray, you both get something in between. Neither knows what the other will choose. And that's where the trap begins. This is the prisoner's dilemma, a classic paradox from game theory. It shows how two people acting in rational self-interest can end up with a worse outcome than if they had simply cooperated. Let's say both prisoners act selfishly. They assume the other might betray, so they betray first. Both confess, and both serve time. But if they'd trusted each other, if they'd both stayed silent, they'd walk away with lighter sentences. Their mutual suspicion created a worse reality for both. It's not just about crime. This paradox exists in science, climate change, arms races, business competition. Whenever individual gain undermines collective good, you find the prisoner's dilemma. It reveals something painful about human nature. We often protect ourselves, even when it hurts us in the long run, because trust is fragile, and when fear enters the room, cooperation disappears. The paradox isn't about choosing right or wrong. It's about how structure shapes behavior. You can be smart, rational, careful, and still walk straight into failure because the game was designed that way. Sometimes the only way to win is to risk being betrayed. And that takes more than logic. It takes belief. Level 28. Brace's Paradox. Adding a shortcut can slow everyone down. Imagine a city. 2 roads connect one side to the other. Traffic flows, not perfectly, but predictably. Then the city adds a new shortcut, a sleek, fast connection that should ease the load. But the result? Traffic gets worse. Everywhere. For everyone. This is Bryce's paradox, a phenomenon in network theory where adding a new path to a system can make the entire system less efficient. It's not a bug. It's a feature of how people behave. Here's how it works. Drivers, like most of us, act in self-interest. They look for the fastest route, the one that gets them home quicker. But when everyone thinks that way, the new shortcut becomes a magnet. It pulls too much traffic. Bottlenecks appear. Delays ripple across the network, and the very thing that was meant to improve traffic makes it worse. It's counterintuitive. More roads should mean more space, more options, more flow. But when everyone chooses independently, the system can fall into a worse equilibrium, one where no individual wants to change routes, even though everyone would be better off if they all did. This paradox doesn't just live in cities. You'll find it in internet networks, electrical grids, even human decision-making. It's what happens when local choices undermine the global system. Bryce's paradox is a reminder that more isn't always better, that freedom to choose doesn't always lead to better outcomes, and that sometimes less is more. Not because it limits you, but because it brings balance. In the world of systems, the fastest path can be the slowest for all, and the smartest move might be not to move at all. Level 29. Parando's Paradox. 2 losing games that win when combined. Imagine flipping a coin. You lose $1 every time. That's Game A. Now there's a second game. Game B, it's trickier. It flips between 2 coins depending on your current balance. One coin is heavily biased against you. The other is slightly in your favor. But overall, you still lose. Play either game on its own, you go broke. But here's the twist. Alternate them, in the right sequence, and you start to win. This is Parando's paradox, discovered by physicist Juan Parando in 1996. It's a paradox of strategy, probability, and the strange way patterns emerge from noise. 2 games, both losing, but together they win, not by magic, but by interference. The structure of Game B feeds off the randomness of Game A. The losses don't cancel, they interact. In the same way, 2 bad decisions can sometimes yield a good outcome, not despite each other, but because of how they collide. You see it in biology, in economics, in complex systems where instability in one area can stabilize another. In some genetic systems, switching between two destructive states can protect against extinction. In finance, shifting between bad investments can, under the right rules, produce gain. It's rare, but it's real. Pareto's paradox reveals that context matters more than components. That systems are not just their parts, but their rhythm. And sometimes you can find progress not by avoiding failure, but by using it. Because what looks like a losing strategy might be exactly what you need, when paired with the right kind of chaos. Level 30. Arrow's voting paradox. Condorcet's paradox. When every choice is preferred, but nothing can win. 3 candidates, a simple election. You ask voters to rank them. No tricks, no manipulation, just preference. And somehow, the results form a loop. Voters prefer A over B, B over C, and C over A. Each wins against another, but loses to someone else. There's no clear winner, just a cycle that goes nowhere. This is Condorcet's paradox, a voting paradox first observed in the 18th century. It reveals a strange truth. Rational individuals can produce irrational group outcomes, and it gets worse. In the 20th century, economist Kenneth Arrow took it further. He proved that no voting system can turn individual preferences into a consistent group preference without breaking at least one principle of fairness. This is Arrow's impossibility theorem. It means there's no perfect system. Every method, ranked choice, majority rule, runoffs, has a flaw. Somewhere it breaks, a result that doesn't reflect true preference, a system vulnerable to manipulation, a choice that contradicts itself. So even when everyone is honest and every vote is counted, democracy can loop, logic can tangle, and fairness, no matter how well designed, can collapse into contradiction. This isn't just theory. It plays out in real elections, in decision-making bodies, in committees and crowds. Anytime a group tries to decide, this paradox waits. Arrow's paradox is a quiet warning that consensus is fragile, that systems bend under the weight of complexity, and that sometimes the most logical process still can't choose. Level 31. The paradox of voting. Downs' paradox. Why do we vote when our votes almost never matter? Imagine this. A national election is happening. Millions of people are casting ballots. You're one of them. But deep down, you know your single vote almost certainly won't decide the outcome. Mathematically, your influence is nearly zero. So why do it? Why bother voting when the cost, time, effort, thought, outweighs the almost non-existent chance that your vote will tip the scales? This is the paradox of voting, also called Downs' paradox, after economist Anthony Downs, who formalized it in 1957. The logic is clean. In a large election, the probability that your vote is decisive is incredibly small, maybe 1 in 10 million. From a purely rational standpoint, voting isn't worth it. Yet people still vote. In huge numbers. They brave lines, read ballots, debate with friends. They care. That's the paradox. If democracy depends on voters, but rational voters have no incentive to participate, why does it work at all? There are theories. Maybe people overestimate their impact. Maybe they vote out of duty, identity, or civic pride. Maybe they vote because other people do, and social behavior becomes its own logic. But none of these are rooted in utility theory. They're rooted in something deeper, something human. Downs' paradox reveals the limits of rational models. It shows that mathematical logic often fails to capture moral logic or emotional motivation. People don't vote because they expect to decide the outcome. They vote to belong, to express, to participate in something larger than themselves. And maybe, in a world run by numbers, that kind of irrationality is what keeps democracy alive. Level 32. Buridan's Ass. When perfect logic leads to death by indecision. Imagine a donkey, hungry, thirsty, placed exactly between a pile of hay and a bucket of water. Both are equally distant, equally appealing, equally necessary. But the donkey can't choose. He waits, stuck between two perfect options, and eventually he dies. Not because there was no choice, but because the choice was too equal. This is Buridan's Ass, a philosophical paradox from the Middle Ages, named after thinker Jean Buridan. It asks, can reason alone guide action when no option stands out? The paradox feels absurd. No real donkey would starve like this, but the question is deeper. What happens when logic can't break the tie? When there's no reason to prefer A over B, and no mechanism to choose at random? For a perfectly rational agent, indifference becomes paralysis. And in that stillness, need becomes tragedy. It's not just theory. Buridan's Ass echoes in artificial intelligence, programs that must make decisions with no clear preference. Human behavior, people frozen between two careers, two relationships, two lives. Game theory, when balanced incentives, create stalemate. The paradox reveals the limits of pure reason. It shows that action sometimes requires imperfection, a bias, a push, a gut feeling. Because perfect balance can be just as dangerous as no options at all. Buridan's Ass reminds us, indecision isn't neutral. It's a decision in disguise. And sometimes survival doesn't mean choosing the best option, just choosing something before the moment passes. Level 33. Achilles and the Tortoise Paradox. A fast runner can never catch a slow one, if time splits forever. Achilles is fast. The tortoise is slow. They're in a race. To be fair, the tortoise gets a head start. Achilles begins to run. He reaches the point where the tortoise started, but by then the tortoise has moved ahead. Achilles reaches that new point, and again the tortoise has moved. This continues forever. No matter how fast Achilles runs, he's always chasing a point that's just out of reach. This is the Achilles and the Tortoise Paradox, one of Zeno's paradoxes, crafted over 2,000 years ago. It challenges a simple idea: motion. The paradox breaks a time into infinite pieces. Each step Achilles takes requires him to cover the distance that the tortoise just moved. And between every 2 points, there are infinitely more. So the race becomes an endless loop, a journey of halves, then quarters, then eighths, always closer, never arriving. But here's the twist. Mathematically, we now know that an infinite sum of shrinking steps can still add up to a finite distance. Achilles doesn't run forever. He overtakes the tortoise quickly. The paradox isn't about physical motion. It's about how we think about infinity. Zeno's puzzle exposes how our minds struggle with the idea of infinite division. We want time and space to be made of pieces, chunks we can understand. But when we divide them endlessly, they stop behaving the way we expect. Achilles doesn't lose the race, but the paradox still wins, because it reminds us that reality doesn't always match intuition, and that between here and there are infinite steps. But sometimes you only need to take one. Level 34. Zeno's Arrow Paradox. If time is made of moments, how does anything move? An arrow flies through the air, but frees the world just for a second. Now look closely. In that frozen instant, the arrow isn't moving. It's not changing position. It's perfectly still. Now freeze the next instant. Still not moving. And the next. And the next. If time is made of these frozen slices, and in each slice the arrow stands still, when does it move? This is Zeno's arrow paradox, another ancient thought puzzle from the Greek philosopher Zeno of Elea. It raises a strange question. If time is a series of static moments, how can motion ever happen? It sounds like a trick. Of course arrows move, but Zeno wasn't doubting reality. He was doubting how we understand it. If every single instant contains no motion, then summing them together should still yield no motion, right? And yet the arrow soars. Modern physics resolves the paradox by showing that motion isn't about individual points, but about change over time. An instant isn't a thing. It's part of a continuous flow. And velocity is defined by how position changes, not what happens at a frozen frame. But Zeno's paradox still stings, because it reveals how slicing time into pieces can leave us blind to the thing we're trying to describe. It's a problem of perspective. If you examine motion too closely, it disappears. But pull back, and it becomes obvious again. Zeno's arrow teaches us that reality may not be built from stillness. That flow, not frame, is what gives the world its rhythm. And sometimes what looks like silence is only a single note in a larger song. Level 35. Aristotle's Wheel Paradox. Two circles, one inside the other. Both roll together, but one travels farther. Imagine two wheels, one large, one small. The small wheel is fixed inside the larger one, like a solid ring inside a tire. Now roll the larger wheel along a flat surface. It makes one full revolution. The smaller wheel rotates with it, same center, same motion. Now ask yourself, how far did each wheel travel? The large one made a path equal to its full circumference. The small one should have done the same. But how? It's smaller. Its circumference is less. So how can it complete a full rotation and still cover the same distance? It can't. And yet it does. This is Aristotle's wheel paradox, a puzzle that appears to break the link between motion, size, and logic. It's been argued over for centuries, because it challenges what seems like basic geometry. One possible answer is this. When the wheels roll together, only the outer edge touches the ground. That's what creates the visible path. The inner circle rotates in sync, but it doesn't leave a trail. So, although it turns one full rotation, its edge never actually touches anything. So the distance it covers is theoretical, not real. But then comes the deeper question. If it turns one full time, but doesn't trace its own circumference, what is rotation? Is it movement through space, or just an illusion of symmetry? Aristotle's wheel paradox lives in the cracks between ideal geometry and real-world physics. It asks whether mathematical models can truly reflect the way things move, and whether motion is always what it seems. Sometimes, two things can move side by side, same speed, same center, same direction, and still never cover the same ground. Because in motion, as in thought, what matters isn't just where you go, but how you touch the world as you go. Level 36. The Elevator Paradox. Why does it always feel like the elevator is going the wrong way? You wait for the elevator. It opens, going up, but you're going down. So you wait again. The next one's also going up. Eventually, you wonder, why are elevators always going the opposite direction? It feels like a weird kind of bad luck, but it's not luck, it's math. This is the elevator paradox, a real-world statistical illusion that reveals how our experiences are shaped by where we are, not just what's happening. Here's how it works. In a tall building, there are often more people traveling from the bottom floors to the top, especially in the morning. So the elevator tends to spend more time going up from the lobby and stopping frequently on the way. If you're somewhere in the middle, you'll encounter the elevator more often when it's full, and more often when it's going the opposite direction from where you want to go. Why? Because there are simply more chances to meet the elevator when it's going the wrong way. And elevators going in the right direction tend to pass by quicker with fewer stops. It's the same principle behind the friendship paradox. Most people's friends seem to have more friends than they do, or why you always seem to be in the slowest line. You're sampling the system from a skewed perspective, from the inside. The elevator paradox is a reminder that our experiences aren't always representative. We see what we're positioned to see, and often what we perceive as bad luck is just a side effect of how we fit into the flow of things. So next time you catch the elevator going the wrong way, don't take it personally. It's not you. It's just probability playing tricks in the hallway. Level 37. The interesting number. Paradox. If every number is boring, does that make a boring number interesting? Imagine listing all positive integers. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on. Now you begin sorting them. Some are clearly interesting, 7 is lucky, 13 is feared, 42 is famous, 1 is unique. Pi and E, well, they're irrational but beloved. But eventually, surely, you'll find a number that's not interesting. Just an ordinary, forgettable integer. Let's say you do. Let's say you find the smallest uninteresting number, and suddenly everything collapses. Because the smallest uninteresting number is, well, interesting. This is the interesting number paradox. A quiet, playful contradiction that turns on language, logic, and how we define meaning. If you say a number is uninteresting simply because it lacks a story, a pattern, or fame, then naming it as the first such number gives it a story. And now it's no longer uninteresting. So that title must pass to the next one. But then that one becomes interesting too, for being the first to replace the last. And on it goes. The paradox doesn't live in the numbers. It lives in the definition. Because interesting isn't objective. It's fluid. It depends on what we care about, what we notice, what we give meaning to. And in that sense, every number is interesting if you look at it hard enough, or if you just say it is. It's a paradox dressed as a joke, but one that speaks to a deeper truth. That meaning is often created by attention, not inherent traits. That the act of pointing at something, naming it, thinking about it, can give it life. Even boredom can be a kind of spotlight. And sometimes, the only thing separating the mundane from the marvelous is the story we attach to it. Level 38. All horses are the same color. Paradox. A proof so convincing, it shows something clearly false. A mathematician steps up and announces, all horses are the same color. Everyone laughs. It's clearly absurd. But then, he begins his proof. Step 1. Base case. In any group of one horse, all horses are clearly the same color. No problem there. Step 2. Inductive step. Assume that in any group of n horses, they're all the same color. Now, take a group of n plus 1 horses. Split them into 2 overlapping groups, the first n horses and the last n horses. Each of these subgroups, by the assumption, has all horses of the same color. And because they overlap, the shared horse ensures both groups are the same color. So, The whole group must be one color too. Repeat this for all n, and you've proven that all horses are the same color. But wait, you haven't, because the whole thing breaks at the beginning, at en equals 2. If you have just 2 horses and you try to divide them into overlapping groups of 1, you can't. There's no shared horse, and the connection, the logic that links the colors, vanishes. This is the all horses are the same color paradox, a classic example of a flawed induction proof. It shows how math, even when done with confidence and precision, can quietly go wrong. Not with a dramatic error, but with a subtle gap, a missing step. The paradox is a lesson in humility, that even airtight reasoning can carry invisible cracks, and that a beautiful argument can lead to a ridiculous conclusion if you don't check every link. Because sometimes, truth isn't about how good the logic sounds, but about where it fails when you look just one step closer. Level 39. Thomson's lamp paradox. A lamp is switched on and off infinitely fast. What happens at the end? You have a lamp. It's simple. It can be either on or off. Now you decide to perform a strange experiment. At time 0, you turn it on. After half a minute, you turn it off. A quarter minute later, on again. Then an eighth. Then a 16th. Each interval is half as long as the last, and you keep going, faster and faster, approaching a total of 1 minute. You flip the switch infinitely many times in that single minute. Then the clock strikes 1 o'clock, and someone asks, is the lamp on or off? This is Thomson's lamp paradox, proposed by philosopher James F. Thomson in 1954. It's not a question of wiring or bulbs or circuits. It's a paradox about infinity, what it means to complete an infinite sequence of actions in a finite time. Let's follow the logic. Each flip reverses the lamp's state, so after an even number of flips, it's off. After an odd number, it's on. But if you flip the lamp infinitely, you don't end with an even or odd number. You end with infinity. And infinity isn't odd. It isn't even. It isn't a number you can count at all. So the question becomes, what is the final state of something that never stops changing? Some say the question is meaningless, that infinity can't be completed. Others suggest there is no final state, only the approach to one. Still others argue the paradox reveals something deeper about time, motion, and the limits of physical reasoning. It's like asking, can a process with no final step still have a final result? In math, infinite series can converge. They can add up to a finite number. But when the thing you're adding is change itself, switching, toggling, reversing, the outcome slips through your fingers. Thomson's lamp is a reminder that infinity isn't just a big number. It's a different kind of reality. And sometimes, asking what happens at the end of a process with no end is the paradox itself. Level 40. The bootstrap paradox. What if the past exists, only because the future sent it there? A man finds a book. It's full of brilliant theories, ideas far ahead of their time. He studies it, learns from it, becomes a scientist. Years later, he travels back in time and brings the book with him. He gives it to a younger version of himself who will grow up to do the same. So, here's the question. Who wrote the book? This is the bootstrap paradox, a mind-bending loop from the world of time travel. It describes a situation where an object, person, or piece of information has no clear point of origin. It exists because it causes itself to exist. A causal loop, where the end is the beginning and the beginning is the end. It's named after the phrase, pulling yourself up by your bootstraps, doing something impossible without any outside help, like an idea that invents itself, or a song passed back in time with no composer, or a watch that travels in circles with no one ever building it. The paradox isn't about logic, it's about causality, because we like to think event A causes event B. But the bootstrap paradox says A causes B and B causes A. No starting point. No first spark. Just an object or idea caught in an eternal loop. In physics, this challenges how we understand time. If time travel were real, could objects or information exist without ever being created? Can something exist just because it always has? It's unsettling, because it breaks the chain. Cause and effect dissolve, and the line between invention and inheritance vanishes. The bootstrap paradox reminds us that time may not be linear, that origins might be illusions, and that some stories write themselves from both ends. Level 41. The paradox of the stone. Can an all-powerful being create a rock so heavy that it can't lift it? The question is deceptively simple. Can an omnipotent being create a stone so heavy that even it cannot lift it? If the answer is yes, then there's something it cannot do. Lift the stone. If the answer is no, then there's something it cannot do. Create the stone. Either way, there appears to be a limit. So, can an all-powerful being have limitations? And if it has limitations, is it still all-powerful? This is the paradox of the stone, an ancient theological and philosophical riddle meant to test the boundaries of omnipotence. It asks, is absolute power logically possible? Or does the very idea collapse under its own weight? Some argue the paradox is just wordplay, a trick of language. They say it's like asking, can a square circle exist? The contradiction is in the definition, not in the power. An all-powerful being can do anything logically possible, but self-contradictory things don't count. Creating a stone it can't lift is like drawing a one-sided coin. It's nonsense. Others disagree. They argue that if power has to follow logic, then logic is the true master, not the being. So even omnipotence must bow to reason. The paradox isn't really about theology. It's about limits, about how we define power, freedom, and possibility. It exposes the cracks in extreme concepts and forces us to ask, what does it mean to be able to do anything? Does it include the ability to defeat yourself? Or is true power knowing where that line is drawn? The paradox of the stone reminds us, some questions don't have answers. They have mirrors. And sometimes, in trying to define the ultimate, we reveal the limits of our own thinking. Level 42. The lottery paradox. You believe each ticket will lose, but also that one must win. Imagine a lottery with 1,000,000 tickets. Only one will win. The rest? Losers. Now, before the draw, you look at each ticket and say, this one won't win? Seems reasonable. After all, the odds of any single ticket winning are 1 in 1,000,000. It's rational to assume each ticket will lose. But now, you say it for every ticket. And suddenly, you've concluded that none of the tickets will win. But that can't be true. One of them must win. This is the lottery paradox, a quiet contradiction that lives at the intersection of belief, probability, and logic. It was first introduced by philosopher Henry Keiberg in 1961. And it asks, can we rationally believe a large number of reasonable things, even if they can't all be true together? Individually, your belief that any one ticket will lose is justified. But collectively, those beliefs contradict reality. You're holding a million rational assumptions that together create an irrational conclusion. So, where does the error lie? Some say the problem is in how we define reasonable belief. Maybe believing something with a 99.9999% chance isn't the same as knowing it. Others argue that logic doesn't scale, that what's true for one may fall apart in the group. Still, others say the paradox reveals the difference between what's probable and what's necessary. It doesn't just apply to lotteries. Think of medical tests, court cases, everyday assumptions. You might think, that person probably won't get sick. That event probably won't happen. Multiply those beliefs across enough people, enough time, and some of them will be wrong. Maybe even disastrously so. The lottery paradox reminds us that rational belief isn't infallible, and that certainty doesn't always come from stacking up good guesses, because sometimes you can be wrong about everything, even when you were right about every single part. Level 43. The envelope paradox. You're given two envelopes. One has more money, but switching always feels smarter. You're offered a choice. Two envelopes. Each contains money. You're told one has twice as much as the other, but you don't know which is which. You pick one. Open it. It has $100. Now you're asked, do you want to switch? You pause. Think it through. If your envelope has the smaller amount, then the other has $200. If you have the larger amount, then the other has $50. So the average value of the other envelope is 0.5 times $200 plus 0.5 times $50. $50 equals $125. That's more than $100. So you switch. But then the same logic applies again and again. You could switch forever. This is the envelope paradox, a brain teaser that breaks intuition with just a few numbers. It's unsettling because the reasoning feels airtight. It seems like switching is always better. But it can't be, because if switching were always better, you'd never stop switching. So what's wrong? The flaw hides in the assumptions. The math assumes that each possibility, having the smaller or larger amount, is equally likely, and that doubling and halving are symmetrical. But they aren't. Without knowing how the amounts were chosen, you can't calculate a meaningful expectation. You're comparing possibilities based on a structure that doesn't exist. In other words, you're using probabilities without context. The envelope paradox is about more than just money. It reveals how reasoning can collapse when fed incomplete information. How logic, when pushed into abstraction, can loop endlessly on itself. It teaches a quiet lesson. Sometimes there's no smarter move, no trick, no secret advantage, just a decision that needs to be made, and then accepted. Level 44. The beard paradox. Sorites revisited. If one hair doesn't make a beard, when does it begin? You see a man with a full beard, no question there. Now imagine he shaves one hair. He still has a beard. Shave another. Still a beard. Again, again, again. At what point does he stop having a beard? There's no clear moment, no precise number of hairs that defines the line. And yet, at some point, it's gone. This is the beard paradox, a variant of the Sorites paradox, from the Greek word sorites meaning heap. The original asks, if you remove grains of sand from a heap, one by one, when does it stop being a heap? The beard paradox asks the same thing, just with stubble. The logic is simple. One hair doesn't make a difference, nor two, nor three. But follow that logic all the way down, and you're forced to say that even no hair at all is still a beard, which feels wrong. The paradox reveals the trouble with vague predicates, concepts that don't have a clear boundary. Words like tall, rich, old, bald, bearded. We use them every day, but we can't define them exactly. And when we try to use logic to chase down a border, it dissolves. Some philosophers argue we must draw arbitrary lines. Others say vagueness is just a part of language, and trying to eliminate it breaks more than it fixes. Still, others suggest a third way: fuzzy logic, a system where things aren't just true or false, but exist in shades between. The bearded paradox is small, even silly, but it asks a serious question. How much change is needed to change identity? And when we can't define the threshold, does that mean it doesn't exist? Or that we're just too used to not noticing the moment things become something else? Level 45. Russell's Paradox. Can a set contain itself without breaking logic itself? Imagine a library. Some books are fiction. Some are nonfiction. Some books even catalog other books. Now imagine a book titled Books That Do Not List Themselves. Should it be in that list? If it does list itself, then it shouldn't be in the book. But if it doesn't list itself, then it should be in the book. So, does it list itself or not? This little loop might seem like a linguistic trick, but it caused a massive shakeup in the foundations of mathematics. This is Russell's paradox, discovered by philosopher and logician Bertrand Russell in 1901. It exposed a deep flaw in how sets were understood in early set theory. Back then, the idea was simple. A set is just a collection of objects. You can have a set of numbers, a set of chairs, even a set of sets. So Russell asked, what about the set of all sets that do not contain themselves? Does that set contain itself? If it does, then by definition it shouldn't. If it doesn't, then it fits its own criteria, and should. A contradiction. And just like that, basic set theory, the foundation of all math, was in crisis. This wasn't just theoretical. Russell's paradox showed that the core of mathematics was built on unstable definitions. To fix it, mathematicians had to rebuild the system. One result was Zermelo-Fraenkel set theory, which introduced strict rules to avoid self-referencing sets. Others created type theory, separating objects into levels to avoid paradoxes altogether. But the lesson stuck. Self-reference, when left unchecked, can break even the most carefully constructed logic. Russell's paradox is a warning that truth, when looped through itself, can unravel. That sometimes the simplest questions, does it contain itself, can lead to the deepest problems, and that in trying to define everything, we might accidentally define nothing at all. Level 46. The Preface Paradox. An author believes every sentence is true, and that some are probably wrong. An author finishes a book, a massive work of nonfiction, full of claims, facts, and references. In the preface, they write, "Despite my care, I expect there are mistakes somewhere in this book." And yet, every sentence in the book is written as if it's true. Each fact is asserted, each argument defended, each chapter stands on the author's full belief. So, here's the paradox. How can you believe each individual claim while also believing that at least one of them is probably false? This is the preface paradox, first formulated by philosopher David Mackinson in 1965. It reveals a strange tension in belief, probability, and human honesty. We often trust every part of something while doubting the whole. A scholar trusts every fact they cite, but knows perfection is unlikely. A scientist believes every result they publish, but admits that some will turn out wrong. A person tells the truth, while knowing memory fails. It's not hypocrisy, it's realism. Each individual belief is rational, but collectively you believe they can't all be right, and yet you believe them anyway. One way out is to say belief isn't always absolute, that we assign confidence, high for most claims, lower for the entire set. But that complicates things, because belief starts to feel fuzzy. Not yes or no, but something in between. The preface paradox isn't about contradiction. It's about humility. It reminds us that certainty and doubt can coexist, that you can be confident and cautious at the same time, and that believing in something doesn't mean you believe you're always right. Just that, for now. It's the best story you can tell. Level 47. The Sleeping Beauty Paradox. When you wake up with no memory, how sure can you be about the world? A woman named Sleeping Beauty agrees to an experiment. On Sunday, she's put to sleep. A fair coin is flipped. If it lands heads, she's woken up once on Monday, then never again. If it lands tails, she's woken up twice, once on Monday, once on Tuesday. But each time her memory is wiped. When she wakes up, she doesn't know what day it is, or how the coin landed. She only knows she's awake. Now she's asked, what is the probability the coin landed heads? Her instinct says, well, it was a fair coin, 50-50. But another voice whispers, is it really that simple? This is the Sleeping Beauty Paradox, a thought experiment about probability, self-locating belief, and how information, or lack of it, can shift what we think we know. There are two camps. The halfers say, the coin was fair. Nothing has changed. Probability of heads equals 1/2. The thirders say, if the coin lands tails, Beauty wakes up twice. She's more likely to be in one of those tails awakenings. So, heads equals 1/3, tails equals 2/3. After all, over time, she'll wake up twice as often when the coin lands tails. So, simply by waking up, she has more reason to believe the coin landed tails. Both sides have logic. Both seem right. And that's the paradox. It's not just about coins or sleep. It's about how experience skews perspective. What does it mean to know something when you're inside the system being measured? The Sleeping Beauty Paradox touches on real questions in philosophy of mind, Bayesian reasoning, quantum mechanics, like the many worlds interpretation. It's about how observation changes probability, and whether our perspective can distort the very facts we're trying to understand. Sometimes you don't need new information to feel uncertain. Just waking up is enough to make you question everything. Level 48. The Paradox of the Unexpected Exam. When the surprise is promised, but logically impossible. A teacher tells her students, there will be a surprise exam next week. The students are intrigued, but the teacher adds, you won't know which day it is until it happens. Now the students start thinking. If the exam is on Friday, it won't be a surprise, because if it hasn't happened by Thursday, it must be Friday. So it can't be on Friday. That rules out Friday. So then they say, well, if it can't be Friday, then if it hasn't happened by Wednesday, Thursday must be the day. But then Thursday wouldn't be a surprise either. And on it goes. They rule out every day, Monday through Friday. They conclude, the exam can't happen. But then, the teacher walks in on Wednesday and hands out the test. The students are shocked, exactly as promised. This is the paradox of the unexpected exam, a mind-bending loop of expectation, logic, and surprise. It's a cousin of the unexpected hanging paradox, where trying to predict a surprise makes it impossible, but not really. The student's reasoning isn't wrong, it's just trapped in a loop. They assume that if they can deduce the exam date in advance, it won't be a surprise. But the logic they use to eliminate the possibility creates the conditions for surprise to exist again. Their certainty opens the door for uncertainty. This paradox explores something subtle: knowledge about knowledge, what you know about what you will know, and how reasoning itself can unravel when it tries to account for its own future state. In logic, this is called epistemic recursion, thinking about thinking. And when that loop turns inward, it breaks. The unexpected exam reminds us, trying to outsmart the unknown can sometimes create exactly what you were trying to avoid. And the only true surprise is realizing that you never stopped expecting it. Level 49. Fitch's Paradox of Knowability. If everything true can be known, then everything must already be known. It starts with a promise. All truths are, in principle, knowable. Seems fair. Not that we know everything now, just that every truth could be known, at least in theory. But from this simple idea comes a strange and disturbing consequence. Logically, it seems to imply all truths are already known. Wait, what? How does the possibility of knowing something turn into a claim that it's already known? This is Fitch's Paradox of Knowability, discovered by philosopher Frederick Fitch in 1963. And it shows how one small shift in logic can unravel our understanding of knowledge, possibility, and even truth itself. Let's break it down. Suppose there exists a truth that no one actually knows, but that could be known. So far, so good. But in formal logic, if you assume that every truth is possibly knowable, you run into a problem. Because once you say that a truth is both true and unknowable, you've contradicted your original assumption. So, the only consistent way to accept that all truths are knowable is to assume that no truths are unknowable. And that leads to this bizarre conclusion. Every truth is already known, at least by someone. But clearly, that's false. There are lots of things no one knows yet. So, where's the flaw? The paradox exposes the difference between what can be known, what is known, and what it means to say something is possibly knowable. It forces philosophers to rethink how we treat knowledge in formal systems. Some argue that the problem is in the formal logic itself. Others say it's in how we define knowability. Still others suggest that knowledge must be tied to contexts or agents, not abstract systems. Fitch's paradox is unsettling because it takes a hopeful idea that truth is always reachable and turns it into something heavy. That maybe, if you want all truths to be knowable, you have to believe they already are. Level 50. The Lottery Ticket Paradox. Belief Aggregation Revisited. You believe each ticket will lose, but you know one must win. So, what do you believe? Imagine a giant lottery. Thousands, maybe millions, of tickets. You inspect each one, carefully, and for every ticket you think, this one probably won't win. You're being reasonable. Each ticket has a tiny chance, almost zero. So it's fair to believe it will lose. You think that for every ticket. But here's the twist. You also know that one of them must win. Now your beliefs conflict. You believe, individually, that each will lose. But collectively, that's impossible. At least one belief has to be wrong. But you believed them all for good reasons. This is the lottery ticket paradox, a version of the classic lottery paradox, now reframed through the lens of belief aggregation. And it asks, can we believe each piece of a puzzle, even when the full picture proves us wrong? In logic, this kind of tension appears often. You have a set of beliefs, each one rational on its own, but taken together they become inconsistent. So what do you do? Abandon one? Lower your confidence in all of them? Try to split your belief into fragments. There's no clear rule. This paradox lives at the heart of how we handle uncertainty. In science, in ethics, in daily life. We believe many things that make sense in isolation, but don't quite fit when placed side by side. It's not just about probability. It's about what it means to believe something in a world where belief itself can be too confident. Some philosophers say belief should be graded, a matter of degrees. Others suggest we change how we define rational belief. That reasonableness doesn't always require consistency. Still, others say the paradox is a reminder that certainty is an illusion, and truth lives somewhere in between. The lottery ticket paradox shows that even the most reasonable thoughts can lead to unreasonable outcomes. And sometimes, the smartest mind in the room is the one that says, I believe, but I might be wrong. Level 51. The paradox of tolerance. To maintain a tolerant society, must we be intolerant of intolerance? Imagine a society built on tolerance, a place where every idea is welcome, every belief protected, every voice allowed to speak. It sounds ideal, inclusive, free. But then something strange happens. A group appears, one that preaches intolerance. They reject others, spread hatred, and use their rights to undermine the rights of others. Now the society faces a dilemma. Should it tolerate the intolerant? If yes, the intolerant grow stronger. They use the tools of freedom to destroy freedom itself. If no, the society becomes intolerant. So, which do you choose? This is the paradox of tolerance, introduced by philosopher Karl Popper in 1945. And it reveals a painful truth. Absolute tolerance can lead to the death of tolerance. The logic is simple. If you tolerate every idea, even those that want to eliminate others, you give space to voices that will silence all others. The paradox is not about disagreement. It's about destruction. Tolerating people who want to ban books isn't noble. It's suicidal. Popper argued that a tolerant society must be willing to defend itself, even by suppressing those who would end tolerance for everyone else, not out of spite, but out of necessity. But this creates an uncomfortable position. To protect openness, you may need to close some doors. To protect freedom, you may need to limit some expressions. It feels like betrayal, but it may be survival. The paradox of tolerance forces us to ask, where do we draw the line? When does free speech become a weapon? How do we defend inclusion without becoming what we oppose? There are no easy answers, but one truth remains. A tolerant society isn't weak. It's one that understands when to say no, even when it hurts. Level 52. The paradox of the court. Revisited as legal loops. When a contract is clear, until it enforces its own contradiction. A law student strikes a deal with his teacher. I'll pay you after I win my first court case. The teacher agrees. They shake hands. Years go by. The student never takes a case, never pays. Frustrated, the teacher sues him to force the payment. But in court, the student makes a clever argument. If I lose, I don't owe because I haven't won a case yet. If I win, I still don't owe because I won this case and the contract says I pay after I win. Either way, he argues, he walks away free. But the teacher fires back. If I win, you pay because the court says so. If I lose, you've won your first case, so by the contract, you owe me. Both arguments seem airtight, and both can't be true. This is the paradox of the court, also known as the Protagoras paradox, and it's one of the oldest legal riddles in history. It shows what happens when contracts, logic, and self-reference collide. At its heart, this paradox is about circular enforcement. The contract depends on a court decision, but the court decision is the condition of the contract. The contract creates the circumstance that defines whether it's valid. It's like trying to define a word using itself. In modern terms, this paradox echoes in legal loopholes. Recursive contracts, systems that enforce their own contradictions. It's a reminder that clarity in law requires more than words. It requires consistency. And when that breaks, justice can loop in on itself. The paradox of the court teaches us that rules can't just sound fair. They must be designed to resolve, not to repeat. Because sometimes two people can be right in a way that makes the truth impossible. Level 53. The twin paradox. Special relativity. Two twins. One travels through space. The other stays home. They reunite, and one is younger. Imagine twin brothers. One stays on Earth. The other boards a spaceship and blasts off at near the speed of light. He travels far, fast, for years. Then he returns. The two meet again. And the twin who stayed on Earth is older, significantly older. This is the twin paradox, a famous thought experiment from Einstein's theory of special relativity. And it challenges our everyday understanding of time. At the heart of it is this idea. Time moves differently depending on how fast you go. The faster you travel, especially near light speed, the slower time passes for you relative to someone who stays still. This is called time dilation. From the traveling twin's perspective, only a few years passed. But back on Earth, decades may have flown by. So, when he returns, his twin is aged, and he hasn't. But here's where the paradox begins. Couldn't the traveler say, from my point of view, you were the one moving, not me? Why isn't it the Earth twin who ends up younger? The key lies in acceleration. The spacefaring twin leaves, turns around, and comes back. That change in motion, that acceleration, breaks the symmetry. It's not just about speed, it's about who changed direction, who felt the forces, who took the longer path through space-time. The twin paradox isn't really a contradiction. It's a demonstration of just how non-absolute time truly is. Time doesn't flow the same for everyone. Not when motion is involved. Not when you approach the speed of light. It's been confirmed by real-world physics. Astronauts on the International Space Station age just a little bit less than people on Earth. Tiny differences, but real. The paradox teaches us that time is not fixed, and that growing old isn't just about how many birthdays you have, but about how fast you move through the universe that holds them. Level 54. The Fermi Paradox. With billions of stars and trillions of planets, why is the universe so silent? Look up at the night sky. Each star you see is a sun. Many, perhaps most, have planets. Some of those planets may be like Earth, warm, wet, alive, and there are billions of galaxies, each with billions of stars. So the question arises, where is everyone? This is the Fermi Paradox, named after physicist Enrico Fermi, who famously asked, if intelligent life is common in the universe, why haven't we seen any signs of it? The logic is troubling. Even if only a tiny fraction of planets develop life, and only a fraction of that life becomes intelligent, there should still be millions of civilizations. Some would be older than ours, technologically advanced, spacefaring, detectable. And yet, nothing. No signals, no probes, no ruins, just silence. There are many theories. Maybe we're alone, life is rare, or Earth is unique. Maybe life is common, but intelligence is not. Maybe civilizations destroy themselves before they spread. Maybe they're hiding or avoiding us. Maybe they've come and left. Or they're already here. Or perhaps we're just too early, or too late. The Fermi paradox isn't really about aliens. It's about expectation versus observation. It reveals a tension between what the math suggests and what reality shows. And that tension forces us to examine our assumptions about life, about technology, about ourselves. Because sometimes the most haunting question is not, are we alone? It's, why haven't they said hello? And what does that silence say about us? Level 55. The Grandfather Paradox. If you travel back in time and prevent your own birth, how did you get there in the first place? Imagine you build a time machine. You step inside, dial the clock backward, and land decades in the past, before you were born. Now imagine you find your grandfather, and for some reason you prevent him from meeting your grandmother. Maybe by accident, maybe on purpose. But either way, the result is the same. You're never born. So now the question is, how did you travel back in time if you were never born to do it? This is the grandfather paradox, one of the most famous time travel contradictions. It exposes a loop where cause and effect eat each other. The logic breaks in both directions. If you succeed, you erase yourself. But if you erase yourself, you were never there. And if you were never there, your grandfather was never stopped. So you were born. And then you go back. Over and over. A loop with no exit. Some explanations try to resolve it. One idea is multiverse theory. You don't change your own past, you create a new timeline. Your grandfather still has you in one universe, but in another, he doesn't. Another says time is self-consistent. You simply can't change the past. Every action you take already fits into history as it happened. In this view, paradoxes never occur, because reality bends to avoid them. But the paradox remains powerful, because it challenges not just time, but identity, causality, and the idea that the past is set in stone. The grandfather paradox reminds us that time isn't just a line. It's a web, and pulling on one thread can unravel everything, or tangle it even tighter. If time travel is ever possible, we'll have to face questions that logic alone may never be able to answer. Like, can you change the past without unmaking yourself in the process? Level 56. The Bootstrap Paradox, revisited as information loops. If knowledge has no origin, who really discovered it? A scientist wakes up with a melody in her head. She writes it down. It becomes famous. Years later, she travels back in time and plays that same melody for a young composer. The composer writes it down. It enters the world. Generations pass. Until one day, the melody appears in the scientist's mind again. But where did it come from? This is the bootstrap paradox, this time framed as an information loop. It's a paradox where a piece of data, a song, a book, a theory, an invention, has no clear point of origin. It exists because it was passed from the future to the past, and that cycle keeps it alive, but rootless. The melody wasn't composed. It was transferred, passed around like a baton in a race with no starting line. The information exists. It's real, but no one ever created it. The paradox isn't just about time travel. It challenges how we understand causality. We're used to thinking A causes B, but here A causes B and B causes A. No beginning, no end, just a loop. This echoes the version of the bootstrap paradox we saw earlier, with objects and artifacts. But here, it's knowledge that loops, which is somehow more eerie, because information feels human, invented, earned. So when it starts to float untethered, it feels like the universe itself is copying answers without showing the work. In real life, we see whispers of this idea. A scientist independently discovers something already buried in obscure notes. A writer pens a story strikingly similar to one they've never read. Coincidence or echoes? The bootstrap paradox asks, can something exist just because it always has? And if knowledge can loop without origin, what else can? Level 57. The paradox of omniscience. Can a being know everything, including what it won't decide yet? Imagine an all-knowing mind. It knows every fact, every event, every thought, past, present, and future. It even knows what you will do before you decide. But here's the question. Can it know what it will choose to do before it chooses it? If it does, then the choice is already made. But if the choice is made, is it still free? And if it can't know its own future decisions, is it still all-knowing? This is the paradox of omniscience, a tension between complete knowledge and free will. It's a paradox that haunts philosophy, theology, and metaphysics, because perfect knowledge seems to imply no surprises, even to the one who knows everything. Suppose an omniscient being says, "Tomorrow I will choose A." Can it change its mind? If it does, it was wrong. So, not omniscient. If it doesn't, then it can't change, which implies it isn't free. Some argue the paradox is built on a misunderstanding, that knowing what will happen is not the same as causing it. That omniscience doesn't mean pre-writing the future, just knowing it. But others push back. They ask, can you truly know your own future choices and still call them choices? Or are you just playing out a script? This paradox touches questions of human free will divine foreknowledge, logical determinism. It doesn't just ask whether someone can know everything. It asks, can anything be unknown to a mind that includes itself? And maybe, to be truly free, a mind must not know everything in advance, even its own. The paradox of omniscience reminds us, knowing everything might mean losing something too. The wonder of decision, the openness of possibility, the mystery of choice. Level 58. The Raven Paradox. Revisited, confirmation confusion. How does seeing a green apple confirm that all ravens are black? You're testing a theory. All ravens are black. So you observe a raven. It's black. That fits. Then another. Black again. Good. Now you look at a green apple. It's not a raven. And it's not black. And somehow, this also counts as evidence. This is the Raven Paradox, revisited. First proposed by philosopher Carl Hempel in the 1940s, it explores how we confirm universal statements, and how logic doesn't always follow intuition. Let's walk through the logic. All ravens are black is logically equivalent to all non-black things are non-ravens. So, every time you observe a non-black, non-raven, like a red ball or a blue chair or a green apple, you're technically confirming the statement. Why? Because you're seeing an example that doesn't break the rule. The logic checks out. But it feels wrong. That's because we expect relevant evidence. A raven confirms something about ravens. A shoe doesn't. Our intuition wants contextual confirmation, not just formal consistency. The paradox highlights a deeper problem in epistemology. What counts as evidence? Does every confirming instance matter equally? Should we weigh observations by relevance, or treat all non-contradictions the same? It's not just about ravens. It's about how we construct belief based on what we observe, and how easy it is to confuse absence of contradiction with actual confirmation. In science, this shows up in data collection. In philosophy, it echoes in debates about induction. In daily life, it lurks behind our reasoning, quietly shaping what we think we know. The raven paradox reminds us, not all truths are confirmed by things that agree with them. Sometimes, truth lives not just in what supports it, but in what feels like it shouldn't. Level 58. The Raven Paradox. Revisited. Confirmation Confusion. How does seeing a green apple confirm that all ravens are black? You're testing a theory. All ravens are black. So you observe a raven. It's black. That fits. Then another. Black again. Good. Now you look at a green apple. It's not a raven. And it's not black. And somehow, this also counts as evidence. This is the Raven Paradox, revisited. First proposed by philosopher Carl Hempel in the 1940s, it explores how we confirm universal statements, and how logic doesn't always follow intuition. Let's walk through the logic. All ravens are black is logically equivalent to all non-black things are non-ravens. So, every time you observe a non-black, non-raven, like a red ball or a blue chair or a green apple, you're technically confirming the statement. Why? Because you're seeing an example that doesn't break the rule. The logic checks out. But it feels wrong. That's because we expect relevant evidence. A raven confirms something about ravens. A shoe doesn't. Our intuition wants contextual confirmation, not just formal consistency. The paradox highlights a deeper problem in epistemology. What counts as evidence? Does every confirming instance matter equally? Should we weigh observations by relevance, or treat all non-contradictions the same? It's not just about ravens. It's about how we construct belief based on what we observe, and how easy it is to confuse absence of contradiction with actual confirmation. In science, this shows up in data collection. In philosophy, it echoes in debates about induction. In daily life, it lurks behind our reasoning, quietly shaping what we think we know. The Raven Paradox reminds us, not all truths are confirmed by things that agree with them. Sometimes, truth lives not just in what supports it, but in what feels like it shouldn't. Level 59. The Skolem Paradox. If a system proves infinity, why does its model still look countable? Imagine you're working with a mathematical system, like set theory. Inside it, you can prove that infinite sets exist. Big ones, uncountable ones, like the real numbers. But then, a strange thing happens. There's a model of that system, a fully valid, consistent interpretation in which everything is countable, even the uncountable sets. Wait, what? This is the Skolem paradox, named after mathematician Thoralf Skolem. It arises from the tension between formal logic and model theory, and it asks, how can a mathematical theory prove that something is uncountable, when every model of the theory seems countable from the outside? Here's what's going on. Set theory, like Zermelo-Fraenkel, ZF, can define uncountable sets. Sets that can't be put into one-to-one correspondence with natural numbers, like the real numbers between 0 and 1. But Skolem showed that these theories can be modeled inside countable systems. From within the model, those sets appear uncountable. The internal logic works. But from outside, In our perspective, we can count all the elements in the model. So the model says uncountable, but we see countable. Both are correct. That's the paradox. It's not a contradiction. It's a relativity of perspective. Inside the system, uncountable means no bijection within the model. Outside, we see the whole structure, and can build a bijection the model itself can't see. The Skolem paradox doesn't destroy mathematics. It reveals that formal systems can describe things that look different depending on where you stand. It shows that mathematical truth is often model relative. This is unsettling, because we think of math as absolute, precise, universal. But Skolem reminds us that truth, even in math, can shift based on the lens we use to see it. Infinity is real, but only from certain points of view. And sometimes, what looks too large to count is just hiding behind the rules of its own language. Level 60. The paradox of the heap. Sorite's redux. How many grains of sand make a heap? And when does it stop being one? You place a grain of sand on a table. It's not a heap. Add another, still not a heap. Add a third, a fourth, a fifth. Eventually, it becomes a heap. But when exactly did that happen? Now reverse it. Start with a clear heap, remove one grain. Still a heap. Another, still a heap. Keep going. At some point, it's just a few grains, then one, then none. So when did it stop being a heap? This is the paradox of the heap, a classic form of the Sorite's paradox, which comes from the Greek word for heap, sorites. It reveals the slippery boundary between vague language and precise reasoning. The logic is simple and flawed. We assume removing one grain doesn't change a heap into a non-heap. But if that were true for every grain, then even 0 grains would be a heap, which feels obviously false. But if there is some number, say 257 grains, where the transition magically occurs, why that number? Why not 256 or 258? The paradox isn't about sand. It's about concepts like tallness, baldness, richness. Old age. These are gradual categories. They lack hard edges, and that makes them hard to reason about. So, how do philosophers respond? Some say we must draw an arbitrary line, not because it's natural, but because it's useful. Others turn to fuzzy logic, where truth is not binary, but a matter of degrees. Still, others argue that the paradox exposes the limits of everyday language itself. The heap paradox reminds us, not every truth fits neatly into yes or no, and not every change is sudden. Sometimes the world shifts grain by grain, and the difference between something and nothing is just one moment in a long, quiet drift. Level 61. The measure paradox. Banach-Tarski paradox. A sphere is cut into pieces and reassembled into 2 identical spheres. Imagine you take a solid ball, a perfect sphere. You slice it into a few precise pieces. You don't stretch them. You don't shrink them. You don't add anything. Then you reassemble the pieces and end up with 2 spheres, each exactly the same size as the original. No trick, no gaps, just 2. This is the Banach-Tarski paradox, one of the strangest results in modern mathematics. It was proven in 1924 by Stefan Banach and Alfred Tarski, and it challenges our very idea of volume, shape, and reality. The paradox claims that you can take a solid sphere in 3-dimensional space, cut it into 5 specific non-overlapping pieces, and, using only rotations and translations, reassemble them into 2 spheres identical to the original. Sounds impossible, but mathematically, it works. So, what's the catch? The pieces aren't normal. They're incredibly non-measurable sets, infinitely scattered, impossible to visualize, and built using the axiom of choice, a powerful and controversial rule in set theory that lets you make infinite selections all at once. Without that axiom, the paradox falls apart. But with it, logic lets it happen. Physically, you can't do this. Atoms aren't infinitely divisible. Matter has limits. Reality doesn't behave like abstract math. But the Banach-Tarski paradox shows that in pure mathematics, our basic assumptions, like volume is preserved, can break when stretched too far. It's not about duplication. It's about how the rules of infinity can make space itself behave like an illusion. So, if you ever feel like something came from nothing, like something doesn't add up, just remember, in the world of sets and spheres, sometimes doubling is just a matter of how you slice it. Level 62. The trolley problem. Would you pull the lever and choose who lives or dies? A trolley speeds down the track. Ahead, 5 people are tied to the rails. You're standing next to a lever. If you do nothing, the trolley hits the 5. But if you pull the lever, it switches tracks and kills one person on the other side instead. What do you do? This is the trolley problem, one of the most famous thought experiments in ethics. First introduced by Philippa Foot in 1967 and later expanded by Judith Jarvis Thomson, it asks a deceptively simple question. Should you sacrifice one life to save 5? Pulling the lever feels cold, calculated. But doing nothing, letting 5 people die, feels worse. Still, is it ever okay to cause harm, even for a greater good? Would you feel responsible? Is doing something morally different than doing nothing? Then come the variations. What if the one person is a child? What if it's someone you know? What if you have to push someone onto the tracks? Is that still the same? Every twist changes your instincts, your logic, your sense of morality. The trolley problem isn't about trains. It's about the clash between two moral systems. Utilitarianism, do the greatest good for the greatest number. Deontology, never use people as a means to an end. Both feel right, both conflict, and most of us live somewhere in the middle. The problem appears in real life, too, in self-driving cars, in battlefield decisions, in hospital triage, when saving one person means letting others go. What's the right call, and who decides? The trolley problem doesn't offer answers. It offers mirrors. It shows us that morality isn't always clean, and sometimes the most impossible choices are the ones we're never truly prepared to make. Level 63. The paradox of the knower. If a truth can't be known, is it still true? A sentence appears on the board. This sentence is not known to be true. You read it and pause. If it's true, then you don't know it's true. But if you do know it's true, then the sentence is false, because it says you don't. So, is the sentence true or not? This is the paradox of the knower, a close cousin of the liar paradox, but twisted around the idea of epistemic truth. Truth as it relates to what can be known. It begins with a simple setup. You create a statement that refers to itself, but not in terms of truth, in terms of knowledge. It says, this very statement is not known, and that loops your brain. Because if it's true, it isn't known. But then, how do you know it's true? If it's false, then it is known, which would make the sentence true. Either way, you land in contradiction. The paradox becomes even trickier when you imagine a logical system designed to track what's true and provable. This is where it ties into Gödel's incompleteness theorems and modal logic. Some truths exist that can't be proven inside their own system, and some statements can describe their own unknowability and still be true, just not knowably so. This raises unsettling questions. Can there be truths that no one can ever know? Can something be real, but forever unreachable? Is knowing limited by the very tools we use to know? The knower paradox doesn't just haunt logic, it haunts philosophy, AI, mathematics, and even theology. It reminds us that knowledge has limits, and that those limits can be described from within the system itself. Sometimes the truth is real, but to hold it, you have to accept that you'll never hold it completely. Level 64. Simpson's Paradox. A trend appears in separate groups, but disappears or reverses when they're combined. You're comparing two treatments for a disease. In Group A, treatment X works better. In Group B, treatment X also works better. So clearly, treatment X is the better choice overall, right? But then you combine the data, and somehow treatment Y comes out on top. What just happened? This is Simpson's paradox, a statistical illusion that shows how combining data can reverse apparent relationships. It's not a trick. It's not a mistake. It's what happens when hidden variables, often called confounders, twist the meaning of what you think you're seeing. Here's a classic example. Two universities are accused of gender bias. Men have higher acceptance rates, but when admissions are broken down by department, each one admits women at higher rates. How? Because women tended to apply to more competitive departments. So, while each department was fair, the overall average told a different story. The aggregated data masked a completely different truth. Simpson's paradox teaches us that trends in groups don't always hold when the groups are merged. Hidden factors can flip outcomes. Intuition fails when statistics get layered. It appears in public health, criminal justice, sports performance, education metrics. Anywhere we use averages to guide decisions, this paradox lurks, and it reminds us of something uncomfortable. You can have correct data and still reach the wrong conclusion. Not because the numbers lie, but because we didn't ask why they say what they say. Simpson's paradox isn't just about math. It's about context. Because in the end, truth isn't just in the data, it's in how you slice it. Level 65. The mere addition paradox. The repugnant conclusion. Would you prefer a small population living in joy, or a massive one barely scraping by? Imagine a world, small population, high quality of life. Everyone is deeply happy. Let's call it World A. Now imagine World B. More people, a much larger population. Each person's life is just slightly less wonderful, but still worth living. World B is slightly less ideal per person, but has more total happiness overall. Is it better? Now keep going. Add more people. Reduce individual happiness just a bit. Repeat. Eventually, you get World Z, an enormous population, billions and billions, all living lives just barely worth living. No deep joy, just content survival. But because there are so many of them, the total happiness is greater than in World A. So now the question is World Z better than World A? This is the mere addition paradox, also known as the repugnant conclusion, coined by philosopher Derek Parfit. And it's one of the most unsettling puzzles in population ethics. The logic comes from utilitarianism, the idea that the best world is the one with the most overall happiness. But if that's true, then a world of billions living marginal lives might be better than one where fewer people live in deep, rich joy. That feels wrong. But how do we avoid that conclusion without breaking the rules of our reasoning? Parfit's paradox forces us to face difficult questions. Does quantity of life outweigh quality? Should we maximize happiness per person or in total? Is there a moral obligation to create more happy people? There's no easy way out. Changing the math breaks fairness. Changing the fairness breaks the math. Some philosophers have proposed alternatives. Prioritize average happiness. Cap population growth. Reject total utilitarianism entirely. But no solution is fully satisfying. The repugnant conclusion reveals a dark edge to ethical reasoning. That a system focused only on maximizing outcomes might quietly erase what we value most. Joy, depth, meaning. Sometimes more really is less. Level 66. The two envelopes. Paradox, revisited. If switching envelopes always seems better, when should you ever stop? You're handed two envelopes. Each contains money. One has twice as much as the other. You pick one. Let's say it has $100. Now you're offered the chance to switch. You think, if this is the smaller amount, the other must be $200. If it's the larger, the other must be $50. So you calculate 0.5 times $200 plus 0.5 times $50. $50 is equal to $125, which is more than your $100. So you switch. But then the same logic applies again, and again. And suddenly you're trapped in an endless loop of always wanting to switch. This is the two envelopes paradox, revisited. A thought experiment that feels like smart decision-making, but slowly reveals a deeper contradiction between expectation, probability, and information. The paradox seems to show that switching always increases your expected value. But that can't be true, because it would mean both envelopes are somehow worth more than each other, which is nonsense. So where does the reasoning break? The flaw lies in what you assume about the money. You're treating the value you see as if it could be either the smaller or larger amount, without considering the actual probability distribution of how the values were chosen. If the amounts were truly random, say $10 and $20, or $100 and $200, your reasoning might hold. But without knowing how the money was placed, your expectation math becomes meaningless. You're assigning probabilities that don't make sense without a defined system. The two envelopes paradox is a trap born from improper assumptions. It teaches us that expected value is not just about plugging in numbers, it's about understanding the context behind those numbers. In real life, this applies to gambling investment choices, cognitive biases, strategic thinking. Whenever a decision looks better by the math, you have to ask, what math am I actually using? Because sometimes reasoning that seems perfectly logical is just a well-disguised loop with no exit. Level 67. The Ship of Theseus. Revisited identity over time. If every part of something is replaced, is it still the same thing? You're standing at a harbor. Before you floats a ship, the famous Ship of Theseus. Over the years, every wooden plank is replaced, rotted beams swapped for fresh ones, one by one. Eventually, none of the original parts remain, and yet people still call it the same ship. But now imagine this. All the old, discarded parts are gathered and rebuilt into another ship. Which one is the real Ship of Theseus? The one that was maintained over time? Or the one reconstructed from the original parts? This is the Ship of Theseus paradox, an ancient thought experiment about identity, continuity, and what makes a thing itself. At first, it seems like a simple question of material. but it quickly becomes a puzzle of philosophical essence. Because we don't just apply this to ships, we apply it to ourselves, our memories, computers, artificial intelligence. If all your cells are replaced over time, are you still you? If your memories shift, your beliefs evolve, your body changes. Where does identity live? There are many perspectives. The gradualist view says, yes, identity survives through continuity and function. Others argue that material origin matters more. The rebuilt ship from original parts might feel more authentic. Some say identity is not absolute. It's a concept we impose for convenience and narrative. The paradox touches everything from metaphysics to science fiction. Is a cloned mind the same person? Is a restored artwork still the original? What happens when a mind is uploaded? Where does a change become replacement? The Ship of Theseus asks us not just what things are, but how we define them over time. Because sometimes what we call the same thing is just a story we keep telling to make sense of the parts we've lost. Level 68. The Sleeping Beauty Paradox. Revisited from probability. If you lose track of time, how do you measure what's likely? Sunday night. Sleeping Beauty agrees to an experiment. A fair coin is flipped. If it lands heads, she's woken once, on Monday. If it lands tails, she's woken twice, on Monday and Tuesday. But with her memory erased after each waking. She always wakes up in a white room. No clocks, no idea what day it is. Just a voice asking, what's the probability the coin landed heads? Instinct says 50-50. It was a fair coin, right? But here's the twist. Over time, if this experiment repeats, 2/3 of her awakenings will happen under tails. Only 1/3 will be heads. So now many argue. The rational answer should be 1/3. This is the Sleeping Beauty Paradox, revisited through the lens of Bayesian probability. And it's one of the most hotly debated puzzles in philosophy of science. There are two camps. The Halfers say, the coin was fair. Nothing changed. It's still a 50-50 chance, regardless of when she wakes. The Thirders say, Sleeping Beauty should consider that she's twice as likely to wake up if the coin landed tails. So, by updating her beliefs based on the experience of waking, she should say 1/3 heads, 2/3 tails. It's not about what happened. It's about how evidence interacts with uncertainty and self-location. When you don't know what day it is or how many times you've woken, you're not just questioning reality. You're questioning your place inside it. This paradox has echoes in decision theory consciousness studies quantum mechanics risk modeling. Anywhere we're uncertain not just about events, but about how many times those events happen and from whose perspective. The Sleeping Beauty Paradox teaches us what seems like a simple probability can shift dramatically once you factor in your own perspective. Sometimes the biggest variable is you. Level 69. The Quine Paradox. A sentence that refers to itself without using quotation marks. Consider this strange sentence. Yields falsehood when preceded by its quotation. Yields falsehood when preceded by its quotation. Read it again slowly. The first part, yields falsehood when preceded by its quotation, is just a quoted phrase. And what follows is that phrase, unquoted. So, what happens when you actually do what the sentence describes? You get the full sentence, which is saying this sentence is false when you put it before itself. And yet, you just did. This is the Quine Paradox, named after philosopher and logician Willard Van Orman Quine. It's a linguistic and logical trick that creates a self-referential loop without ever saying this sentence. No circular phrases, no obvious loops. But the sentence still points to itself. It's like watching a snake eat its tail without ever being told it's a snake. Self-reference is often at the root of paradoxes. The liar paradox says, this sentence is false. But Quine's version wraps that self-reference in a clever disguise. It builds a loop out of language alone. So why does it matter? Because this form of indirect self-reference is crucial in logic, programming, and philosophy. It's how Gödel built his incompleteness theorem, by crafting a mathematical sentence that essentially says, this statement cannot be proven. Not with circular language, but with structural recursion. The same applies in computers, AI, and formal systems. The Quine paradox shows us that self-reference isn't just a trick. It's a powerful force. It can create meaning, or unravel it completely. And sometimes the quietest sentence in the room is the one silently talking about itself. Level 70. The Preface Paradox. Revisited from Belief Theory. You believe everything you wrote is true, and that some of it is probably wrong. An author finishes writing a book, a long, carefully researched work. They believe every claim in it, each sentence, each chapter, each footnote. But in the preface, they write, despite my best efforts, there are probably errors in this book. That's honest, that's wise, but also contradictory. This is the preface paradox, viewed through the lens of belief theory. It reveals the strange tension between believing each part of something individually, while also believing the whole might contain mistakes. Both beliefs seem rational, and together they clash. The paradox goes like this. You believe statement A. You believe statement B. You believe statement C, and so on. But you also believe at least one of these statements is probably false. Now your beliefs conflict. Because if you truly believe they're all correct, you shouldn't think any are wrong. But if you believe one is wrong, you should doubt at least one of them. Yet you don't. You believe each one confidently. This happens all the time. Authors publishing detailed research, scientists submitting papers, people explaining things they believe to be true, while still acknowledging human error. It's not hypocrisy, it's realism. So how do we resolve it? Some say beliefs should be graded. You don't believe each statement absolutely, but with high confidence. Others say rational belief doesn't require logical consistency at all times, especially when uncertainty is involved. Still others think the paradox just reveals the limitations of how we model belief. The preface paradox teaches us that humans don't believe like machines. We carry tension. We hold space for doubt. We believe honestly, even when logic strains. To know something isn't to be infallible, and to believe in your work is not to deny the possibility of flaw. Sometimes, truth lives in the margin of error. Level 71. The Problem of the Criterion. How can you know something without first knowing how to know? You want to know what's true, but before that, you need a method, a reliable way to decide what counts as knowledge. So you ask, what's the right method? But to choose a method, you need to already know some truths to test the method against. Now you're stuck. You can't know the truth without a method, and you can't find a method without already knowing some truth. It's a loop. This is the problem of the criterion, a classic puzzle from ancient epistemology. It asks, which comes first? Knowledge or the way to judge it? If you say knowledge comes first, How did you know what to believe? If you say the method comes first, how did you choose the method? Some philosophers break the loop by choosing a starting point. Foundationalists pick certain basic truths to build on. Coherentists say beliefs justify each other as a system. But the paradox remains. Because deep down, most of us assume we can recognize truth when we see it. The real mystery is, how do we know we're not just guessing with confidence? Level 72. Newcomb's Paradox. Would you trust your free will, or a being that can predict it? You're offered 2 boxes. Box A is transparent. It contains $1,000. Box B is opaque. It might contain $1 million or nothing. You have 2 choices. Take only Box B. Take both boxes. But here's the twist. A superintelligent predictor has already made its decision. If it predicted you'd take both, it left Box B empty. If it predicted you'd take only B, it placed $1 million inside. And the predictor is almost never wrong. So, what do you do? This is Newcomb's paradox, a battle between logic and intuition. Game theory says, take both, the money is already there or not. But people say, if the predictor is nearly perfect, you'll do better by taking only Box B. It's a conflict between 2 ideas. Dominance reasoning, maximize guaranteed payoff, expected utility, maximize likely outcome based on prediction. Newcomb's paradox forces us to ask, if your choices can be predicted, do you still have free will? And if you trust the prediction, are you really choosing at all? Level 73. Moore's Paradox. It's raining, but I don't believe it. Say this out loud. It's raining, but I don't believe that it's raining. The sentence isn't contradictory. It could technically be true. You could be standing in the rain and still not believe it. But something about it feels wrong. Because if you're saying it's raining, you're acting like you believe it, even as you say you don't. This is Moore's paradox, named after philosopher G.E. Moore. It's not about logical contradiction. It's about belief and how we communicate it. There are many versions. He's honest, but I don't trust him. That's my plan, but I don't think it'll work. They're possible. They're even relatable. But when spoken, they sound deeply off. Moore's paradox reminds us there's a strange gap between what we say, what we believe, and what others assume we believe based on what we say. Sometimes the paradox isn't in the facts, but in the tone of the mind that speaks them. Level 74. The Paradox of Tristram Shandy. If you write slowly about your life, can you ever finish? Tristram Shandy is writing his autobiography. But here's the catch. It takes him 1 full year to write about 1 single day of his life. So, after a year of writing, he's only documented the first day. Meanwhile, another 364 days have passed, each needing their own year to be written. At this rate, he'll fall infinitely behind. This is the paradox of Tristram Shandy, proposed by philosopher Bertrand Russell. It asks, can you ever finish describing a life that keeps generating more life to describe? Surprisingly, in mathematics, the answer is maybe. If both the life and the writing continue infinitely, they can be paired 1 to 1. Day 1 written in year 1, day 2 in year 2, and so on, forever. In theory, the backlog never grows. It's a paradox of infinity, not of speed, but of structure. And it shows that sometimes impossibility only exists when you expect an ending. Level 75. The Continuum Hypothesis. Paradox. Is there a size of infinity between countable and uncountable? We know some infinities are bigger than others, The set of whole numbers is infinite, but the set of real numbers between 0 and 1 is a bigger infinity. So here's the question. Is there an infinity that's in between? A set larger than the natural numbers, but smaller than the real numbers. That's the continuum hypothesis. And the paradox? It can't be proven true or false. In the 20th century, mathematicians showed that within standard set theory, the continuum hypothesis is undecidable. It's neither provable nor disprovable. That's not just unusual. It shakes the foundation of what we think math is. This paradox doesn't break logic. It exposes its limits. It reminds us that even in pure mathematics, some questions can't be answered. Not because they're too hard, but because truth in math can depend on the system you choose to believe in. Level 76. Hempel's Paradox, the Raven Redux. How does a green apple confirm that all ravens are black? You're testing a simple hypothesis. All ravens are black. So, seeing a black raven seems like strong evidence, but logically, this is equivalent to all non-black things are non-ravens. So, a green apple, which is not black and not a raven, also supports the hypothesis. That feels absurd. This is Hempel's paradox, also known as the paradox of confirmation. It reveals how logic and intuition don't always agree on what counts as evidence. Formally, every non-black non-raven confirms the rule, but we instinctively feel that only actual ravens should count. It's not that the green apple helps much, just that it technically doesn't contradict the claim. And that's the problem. Because if everything not contradicting counts as confirmation, then anything can feel like proof of anything. It's a warning. Confirmation isn't just about counting agreement. It's about what actually matters to the claim being tested. Level 77. The Grelling-Nelson Paradox. Does the word heterological describe itself? Some adjectives describe themselves. Short is a short word. English is an English word. These are called autological. Others, like long or French, don't describe themselves. They're called heterological. So here's the question. Is the word heterological heterological? If it is, then it doesn't describe itself. But that means it does, because that's what heterological means. If it isn't, then it does describe itself, which would make it heterological again. A perfect loop. It contradicts itself no matter what you decide. This is the Grelling-Nelson paradox, a self-referential puzzle from the early 1900s. Like the liar paradox, this sentence is false. It breaks meaning using its own definition. It shows how language, when it talks about itself, can fold in on logic until there's no way out. Level 78. The Paradox of Fiction. Why do we cry over stories we know aren't real? You watch a movie, a character dies. You cry, but you know it's fiction. No one actually died. So here's the puzzle. How can we have real emotions about things we don't believe are real? This is the paradox of fiction. It challenges the idea that emotion must be tied to belief. Logically, if you know something is fictional, you shouldn't react emotionally. But we do, all the time. Some say it's imagination. We respond as if it were real, just long enough to feel something. Others argue fiction taps into real fears, hopes, and losses, even when the characters are invented. The paradox reminds us, our emotions aren't bound by logic. Sometimes we feel deeply, not because something is true, but because it feels true. Level 79. The Tortoise and Achilles, revisited from logic. If you accept logic, do you still need to follow it? Achilles is talking to a tortoise. The tortoise gives him a simple logical argument. A implies B, A is true. Therefore, B must be true. Achilles agrees. It's perfectly logical. But the tortoise says, fine. But do you accept that if A implies B and A is true, then B must follow? Achilles says yes. Then the tortoise says, then you must also accept a new rule. If you accept those three things, then B follows. And so on. This is the tortoise and Achilles paradox, reframed from Zeno's original motion paradox into a paradox of reasoning itself. It was presented by Lewis Carroll in 1895. It shows that even if you accept logical steps, you can keep demanding new rules to connect them, endlessly. And that raises a strange question. Is logic something we follow, or something we have to agree to follow? It's a subtle paradox, but it hints at the foundation of all reasoning. At some point, we don't just apply logic, we trust it. Level 80. The non-identity problem. If your life is the result of a harmful decision, can you say you were harmed? Imagine someone makes a harmful choice, like polluting the planet or starting a war. Decades later, a child is born. Their life is difficult because of that decision, but without it, they never would have existed at all. So here's the paradox. Can they say they were harmed if the only alternative was never being born? This is the non-identity problem posed by philosopher Derek Parfit. It challenges how we think about harm, responsibility, and morality. Normally, harm means making someone worse off. But if someone's existence depends on the harmful act, they weren't made worse. They were made possible. So, did the wrong action actually harm them? The paradox forces us to rethink, can we harm people by changing who comes into existence? Do future people have moral claims before they exist? It's not just theory. It matters for climate change, policy, and ethics. Because some choices don't just shape lives. They shape which lives happen at all. Level 81. The paradox of the plank of carneades. If survival means killing an innocent, are you guilty? Two shipwrecked sailors find a plank, only big enough for one to survive. One reaches it first. The other grabs on and is pushed off into the sea. The first survives. Now ask yourself, was it murder or just survival? This is the plank of carneades, a classic moral paradox from ancient philosophy. It pits self-preservation against moral responsibility. In the moment, the choice feels instinctual. No time to weigh ethics, it's life or death. But afterward, society asks questions. Should the survivor be punished? What counts as justified harm? Is necessity a defense? This paradox echoes in real dilemmas. Who gets the last hospital bed? Who gets rescued first at sea? How do we judge actions taken in desperation? It reminds us that morality can fracture under pressure, and that sometimes the difference between a hero and a villain is just who's left to tell the story. Level 82. The teletransportation paradox. If every part of you is copied, is the new you still you? Imagine a machine that scans your entire body, every atom, every neuron, and recreates you perfectly in another location. The original is destroyed. The copy steps out, identical in mind and body. People greet it like it's you. But is it? This is the teletransportation paradox, made famous by philosopher Derek Parfit. It asks, does continuity of identity require continuity of matter? Or is being you just about pattern and memory? If the replica thinks like you, feels like you, remembers your life, what exactly is missing? Some say nothing, others say everything, because the original dies and a perfect copy lives on. Is that survival? Or is it a well-disguised death? The paradox presses on our idea of self. Are you your body, your brain, your history, or just the illusion of continuity held together by thought? The teletransportation paradox reminds us, in chasing convenience and speed, we might accidentally ask, what part of me can I afford to lose? Level 83. The Bernadette Paradox. Can an infinite trap stop you without ever touching you? Imagine you try to walk across a path, but at every step a new invisible barrier appears, just far enough ahead to stop you. Each barrier is placed in advance, an infinite number of them, getting closer and closer to you. You never hit one, you never feel one, but you also never move forward. This is the Bernadette Paradox, a strange twist on infinity and causality. No force touches you. No barrier reacts to you. And yet, you're completely stopped by something that never needs to act. It's not just a puzzle about motion. It's about potential and how infinite setups can influence reality without ever completing themselves. Some philosophers use it to question, can infinite conditions create a real effect? Can you be prevented from doing something without any single moment of prevention? The Bernadette Paradox reminds us, sometimes it's not the obstacles you meet that stop you. It's the ones that were always going to be there. Level 84. The Monty Hall Paradox. Switching doors feels wrong, but it always increases your odds. You're on a game show, 3 doors. Behind one, a car. Behind the others, goats. You pick door 1. The host, who knows what's behind each door, opens door 3, a goat. Now you're asked, do you stay with door 1 or switch to door 2? Most people say it doesn't matter. 50-50 chance, right? Wrong. This is the Monty Hall Paradox, named after the host of Let's Make a Deal. And the math says, you should always switch. Why? Because when you first picked, you had a 1 in 3 chance. Meaning, a 2 in 3 chance the prize was not behind your door. Revealing a goat doesn't change that. It just focuses the 2 in 3 odds onto the remaining closed door. It feels like a trick, but it's just conditional probability. Your odds improve the moment the host opens a door. Not because the game changes, but because your information does. The Monty Hall Paradox reminds us, when the world offers new clues, what feels safe isn't always smart. Level 85. The Paradox of Fictional Truths. Can something be true only inside a lie? Sherlock Holmes lives at 221B Baker Street. We all know that. It's common knowledge. But Holmes isn't real. Never was. So how can a false world contain things that are true? This is the paradox of fictional truths, a puzzle in the philosophy of language. It asks, how can we talk meaningfully about things that don't exist? If Holmes doesn't exist, how can it be true that he has a pipe or lives in London? And if it's not true, why does it feel wrong to say he lives in Paris? One answer. Truth in fiction is relative. It's true in the story, even if it's false in reality. But then, what kind of truth is that? Is it belief? Is it imagination? Or is it something else entirely? This paradox shows that not all truths are rooted in reality. Some live in the stories we share and the worlds we build, even if we build them from nothing. Level 86. The Mereological Paradox. When you replace all the parts, does the whole still exist? Take apart a car, piece by piece, frame, tires, engine, seat cushions, each part stored in a box. Now ask, where is the car? Is it still the car if it no longer has a shape? What if someone reassembles the parts into something new? Is it still the same object, or has it died and been reborn? This is the mereological paradox, a puzzle from the study of parts and wholes, mereology. It asks, what makes something one thing? Is identity about form, function, history, or is whole just a word we use for convenience? If a thing is just its parts, why does rearranging them feel like loss? Why does something vanish the moment it loses its shape? The mereological paradox reminds us, wholeness may not be real. It may just be a story we tell when we want the pieces to mean something more. Level 87. The absent-minded driver. Paradox. What happens when the right decision depends on what you forget? You're driving home on a highway. You'll pass 2 exits. The first leads to a small reward. The second leads to a better one. Miss both, and you get nothing. But there's a catch. You're absent-minded. You'll forget whether you already passed the first exit. So, when you reach an exit, you won't know if it's the first or second. What should you do? This is the absent-minded driver paradox, a problem in decision theory. It reveals a strange truth. Sometimes the best decision depends not on what you know, but on what you won't remember. If you try to play it safe and exit early, you might miss the bigger reward. But if you aim for the later exit, you risk missing both. There's no perfect choice, only probabilities. The paradox shows how uncertainty about where you are can distort the best path forward, even if that path is clear in theory. It's a reminder that rationality isn't just about knowing what's right, but knowing when you're wrong. Level 88. The paradox of value. Diamond water paradox. Why is something essential, often worth less than what we don't need? You need water to live. You drink it every day. Without it, you would die in a matter of days. Diamonds? They sparkle. They're rare. But you can't eat them. You don't need them. So why are diamonds so much more expensive than water? This is the paradox of value, also known as the diamond water paradox, famously discussed by economists like Adam Smith. It challenges the idea of what something is worth. If water is more important to life, why is it often cheaper? The answer lies in marginal utility. We have lots of water, so one more unit of it, not a big deal. Diamonds are rare, so each one feels valuable, even if it's useless. The paradox teaches us, value isn't always tied to need. It's tied to scarcity, context, and what people are willing to trade. Sometimes what glitters really is gold, even if gold can't keep you alive. Level 89. The paradox of analysis. If your definition is perfect, why does it feel like you've said nothing new? You ask, what is a bachelor? Someone answers, an unmarried man. That's correct. Clear, precise. But now ask, did you learn anything? This is the paradox of analysis, posed by philosopher G.E. Moore. It asks, if a definition is true, it must say something already understood. But if it says something new, how can it still be exactly right? It's a tension between clarity and discovery. A perfect definition feels obvious, yet the process of analyzing it still deepens understanding. So, is it informative or not? Some say the value is in making the obvious explicit. Others argue definitions can reveal hidden structure, even when the words are familiar. The paradox of analysis reminds us, sometimes the most useful answers don't surprise us. They crystallize what we already knew but couldn't say. Level 90. The paradox of the unexpected hanging. Reversed perspective. Can a surprise be perfectly predicted and still surprise you? A judge tells a prisoner, you will be hanged next week, but the day will be a surprise. The prisoner thinks it through. It can't be Friday. If he's still alive Thursday night, he'll know it's coming. So Friday's ruled out. Then Thursday too, same logic. One by one, he eliminates every day. Conclusion: the hanging won't happen at all. But then, Wednesday comes. The guards arrive, and he's completely shocked. This is the unexpected hanging paradox, revisited from the reverse perspective. It shows how perfect reasoning can lead to a completely wrong outcome. The prisoner thought the surprise was impossible, but the very act of ruling it out made it possible again. This paradox challenges how we understand prediction, self-reference. Logical certainty. It reminds us, sometimes the future has to fool us to stay true. Level 91. The observer's paradox. Can observing something change the very thing you're trying to observe? A linguist wants to study how people speak casually, so they walk into a room with a notebook and recorder. Everyone's speech changes. They become formal, careful, artificial. The data's ruined, not because people lied, but because they were being watched. This is the observer's paradox. It's the idea that the act of observing a phenomenon can alter it. It appears in sociology, psychology, and even physics, like in the double-slit experiment, where observing a particle changes how it behaves. The paradox raises a deep question. Can we ever see something exactly as it is, without affecting it in the process? In science, it means experiments need careful controls. In life, it means behavior is always shaped by who's watching, even if it's just yourself. The observer's paradox reminds us, to look closely is to touch. And sometimes, the clearer the lens, the more invisible the truth becomes. Level 92. The Gettier Problem. Can you have justified true belief and still not know? For centuries, philosophers thought knowledge was simple. Justified true belief. If you believe something, have good reason, and it's true, then you know it. But then came a twist. A man looks at a clock. It says 2 o'clock. He believes it's 2 o'clock, and he's right. But the clock is broken, stuck at 2 o'clock since yesterday. Was he right? By accident. This is the Gettier problem, introduced by Edmund Gettier in 1963. It shattered the traditional definition of knowledge. Because even though his belief was justified, true believed, we hesitate to say he really knew it. The problem reveals how luck can sneak into belief, creating truths that don't feel earned. It challenges us to rethink what knowledge really means. The Gettier problem reminds us, sometimes being right isn't the same as knowing why you're right, and not all truth comes with certainty. Level 93. The Mere Exposure Paradox. Can you like something more just because you've seen it before? You hear a song, you don't love it, then you hear it again, and again. One day you realize you kind of like it now. Nothing changed, except how many times you heard it. This is the mere exposure paradox. It's the idea that repeated exposure to something can increase your preference for it, even if it's not objectively better. From faces to fonts to political slogans, our brains equate familiarity with safety. So we grow to like things not because they're good, but because they're known. It's useful, it's efficient, but also dangerous, because it means repetition, not quality, can shape our beliefs and feelings. The mere exposure paradox reminds us, what feels right might just be what feels familiar. And comfort doesn't always mean truth. Level 95. The Lottery Paradox. If every ticket will probably lose, why can't you say they all will? 1 million lottery tickets are sold. You know the odds. almost every ticket is a loser. So, for each one, you reasonably believe this ticket won't win. But one of them has to win. So you've just believed something about every ticket that you know, taken together, can't be true. This is the lottery paradox. It shows how rational beliefs about individuals can lead to an irrational conclusion when combined. Each belief feels justified. But the group of beliefs, they can't all be right. It challenges how we think about brain probability book, rational belief thinking, collective reasoning. It asks, should we doubt our individual beliefs just because they don't add up neatly? Or accept that sometimes truth gets messy in a crowd? The lottery paradox reminds us, logic may be clear in pieces, but truth doesn't always survive when the pieces are stacked. Level 96. Polanyi's Paradox. How can we do things that we don't know how we do? You ride a bike. You balance, turn, and correct effortlessly. But if someone asked you to explain how, step by step, you'd probably stumble. You can do it, but you can't describe it. This is Polanyi's Paradox, named after scientist and philosopher Michael Polanyi. It highlights a strange truth. We know more than we can tell. Much of human skill is tacit knowledge, understanding that's hard to put into words. You know a friend's mood by a glance. You recognize sarcasm from a tone. You play piano, dance, type, not by thinking, but by doing. For AI and automation, this creates a major challenge. We can't program what we can't explain. Machines struggle to replicate tasks that humans do without conscious thought. Polanyi's paradox reminds us, not all knowledge is in the mind. Some of it lives in the body, in habits, instincts, and patterns we stopped noticing long ago. And sometimes, the deepest understanding is the hardest to explain. Level 97. The Bootstrap Paradox, Object Edition. Can something exist without ever being created? You travel back in time with a book. You leave it on a desk. A young writer finds it, studies it, copies it. Years later, they grow up and write that same book. Then someone brings it back in time again. So ask yourself, who wrote the book? This is the bootstrap paradox in its classic object-based form. An item, a book, a tool, even a person, is passed back through time and becomes its own origin. No one creates it. It just loops. It's named after the phrase, pulling yourself up by your bootstraps, something that sounds logical but is physically impossible. Just like this. The paradox raises deep questions about causality, time, travel, identity. If something exists only because it was passed backward, is that existence even real, or is it a glitch in logic disguised as a story? The bootstrap paradox reminds us, some loops don't need beginnings, but that doesn't mean they make sense. Level 98. The Sorites Paradox, Revisited. If removing one grain doesn't destroy a heap, when does it stop being a heap? You have a heap of sand. You remove one grain. It's still a heap. Remove another. Still a heap. Keep going. At what point does it stop being a heap? This is the Sorites paradox, also called the paradox of the heap, and it's a puzzle about vagueness. One grain doesn't make the difference, but many insignificant steps add up to a significant change. It applies to more than sand. When does someone become bald? At what point is a person old? When is a crowd no longer a crowd? We like sharp boundaries, but the world often works in gradients, and when we insist on precision, vagueness turns against us. The Sorites paradox reminds us, not all changes are loud. Sometimes identity slips away one quiet grain at a time. Level 99. The paradox of the self-taught expert. Can you become an expert without knowing what you don't know? You want to master a subject, so you teach yourself, you read, you practice, you dive deep. But here's the twist. How do you know what to study if you don't already know what matters? How can you correct your misunderstandings if no one tells you they're wrong? This is the paradox of the self-taught expert. It challenges the idea of independent mastery. Because becoming truly knowledgeable often requires feedback from people who already know more than you. But if you're alone, how do you recognize your blind spots? What if your expertise is just a refined misunderstanding? It's not just academic. It happens in art, science, and belief systems. Sometimes we build elaborate knowledge on fragile foundations, and without challenge, we may never know how shaky it really is. The paradox reminds us, learning in isolation is powerful, but dangerous. Because true expertise isn't just about what you've discovered. It's about knowing what you still can't see. Level 100. Peto's paradox. Why don't whales get cancer more often than humans? Big animals have more cells. More cells mean more chances for mutations. More mutations mean higher risk of cancer. So, logically, an elephant or a whale should get cancer all the time, but they don't. In fact, they get it less often than humans do. This is Peto's paradox, named after epidemiologist Richard Peto. It asks, why doesn't cancer scale with size and lifespan? A human has around 30 trillion cells. A blue whale has 1,000 times more. But whales aren't riddled with tumors. They're fine. So, what's going on? The answer might be evolution fought back. Larger animals may have evolved extra cancer defenses, more tumor-suppressing genes, better DNA repair, or smarter cell death programs. They had to, because without them, they'd never live long enough to reproduce. Peto's paradox reminds us, nature isn't always linear, and what looks like a flaw in logic might just be a deeper kind of balance.